Thank you so much, and good morning, Bula Binaka. And thank you everyone for joining us at this National Forum on Women in Politics, a yearly forum we have been co-facilitating since 2018. And this year, the forum is exploring what we call temporary special measures for inclusive governance in Fiji. And we will discuss this in the context of Fiji's anticipated constitutional review, but also in relation to the target of SDG 5, gender equality by 2030. So can temporary special measures, or TSMs for brief, be part of the solution? And what are the lessons learned from elsewhere in the world or in the Pacific? I would like to thank Honorable Lenora Salusalu Kerekere Tapua, Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, Deputy Speaker, Chairperson for the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians Fiji Group, for agreeing to be our chief guest today and for being such a champion for women's rights and political representation. And I also want to thank and acknowledge the presence of Shashi Kiran, Minister for Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation. And many thanks in advance to Dr. Karen Baker for delivering the keynote and sharing your knowledge and expertise on the use of gender quotas in the Pacific. And many, many thanks to our distinguished panel members. In the interest of time, I will not name you all, but we are truly honored to have you speaking today, representing diverse perspectives on this topic. And I also want to thank all the participants, CSO, political party representatives, academics, international organizations. We look forward to hearing your views and feedback as well, whether you're participating online or on site. At International IDEA, we have studied temporary special measures, particularly gender quotas, since 2003, so more than 20 years now, including a global database that we maintain and update together with Stockholm University and the Interparliamentary Union, IPU. And this database provides information on the various types of quotas in existence today. And it reveals that the use of electoral gender quotas is much more widespread than is commonly believed. And in fact, half of the countries in the world today use some form of electoral quota for their parliaments. And you can easily access this database from our International IDEA website. As you know, gender quotas come in different forms, as do the political and the electoral systems in which they are implemented. So they may target women specifically, or they may be gender neutral, setting a minimum and maximum for both women and men. And they can be implemented directly through elections or indirectly through appointments by designated authority. Most quotas aim to increase women's representation, as the issue to address is usually the underrepresentation of women, relevant since women typically constitute 50% of a population in any given country. However, quotas may also be used for other groups. For example, Gambia's draft constitution suggests including 10% quota for young people. As we know, India's constitution has quotas for scheduled castes and tribes or indigenous peoples. Nepal has quotas for women, but also for what is called backward castes and Dalits. And in Australia, some political parties have candidate quotas for LGBTQIA+ people. But perhaps a word about the concepts we are using. Sometimes we use temporary special measures and quotas interchangeably. TSM is more of a UN parlance, emphasizing the fact that quotas should not be seen as a permanent feature of a political system, but rather as something to be removed once the desired situation is achieved. At the same time, increasing numbers of countries have adopted policies where gender parity, the equal representation of women and men, is considered a fundamental principle of democracy. So countries that have adopted goals of gender parity includes Bolivia, Costa Rica, France, Mexico, Tunisia, and a few others. So gender parity is not regarded as a temporary special measure, but is instead considered a permanent necessity of a democratic government. And quotas often serving as a step towards achieving that. Our research shows that the use of gender quotas or TSMs can be effective in advancing gender equality, but that their adoption and impact vary widely depending on political, cultural, and institutional contexts. So in Nepal, for example, many have concluded that the 30% quota has been necessary, albeit not sufficient step in achieving gender equality. Just to conclude, and as you may detect from my accent, I come from Finland, one of the Nordic countries, where we have about 47% of women in parliament with an open list PR system, very similar to Fiji, but without quotas. But it took over 100 years to get there. So while we have achieved nearly parity without quotas, I would not recommend that route either, because I don't think any young women of 21st century, or men either, have that kind of patience, and they shouldn't have to. But what is clear is that to achieve SDG 5 of gender equality by 2030, more determined action is required. And there are still many historical, cultural, political, legal hindrances in the way. And question, I suppose, for us today is if could the TSMs, or temporary special measures, or gender quotas, could they play a role in fostering more inclusive governance in the context of Fiji? If yes, how to design those? If not, why not? And I wish us all a very productive discussion on this fascinating topic. Thank you, and Vinaka.
Value, Lina, 47% in 100 years. It's quite a lot of work, but I'm sure across the room we can make that happen. Keep hammering at the wall to make a dent, and the rubble will start to fall. I would like to introduce our chief guest this morning before she shares insight into the conversation on TSM, and as Lina has mentioned, the difference between TSM and quota. Honorable Ngengertambo is a name that resonates with dedication, leadership, and a relentless commitment to the betterment of society. Currently serving as Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs, Deputy Speaker of Parliament, and the Chairperson for the Commonwealth Women's Parliamentarians Fiji Group. Her journey is one of inspiration, marked by a diverse career spanning communications, public relations, and philanthropy. She's widely recognized. I remember watching the television show The Pacific Way not so long ago. Beyond her professional achievements, she has been a tireless advocate for environmental issues and women's representation in Parliament. Her work with organizations like Lifeline Fiji, WOW's Fiji, and Save the Children reflects her deep commitment to social issues. In 2022, not so long ago, general election, Honorable Ngerengere with her party, the National Federation Party, played a pivotal role in forming the government. Sworn in as Deputy Speaker and later reassigned Assistant Minister for Foreign Affairs in May 2023. Please join me in making her welcome. Naka.
Thank you so much, Sepesa. Nisa and Vinaka, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to acknowledge the Honorable Minister for Women, Children and Social Protection, Honorable Sashi Kiran. Also want to acknowledge the presence of the Chair of the Songosogo Marami Tauke and the Fino Tamkaldoro, Dr. Karen Baker from the Australian National University, the distinguished panel of speakers, representatives from political parties, civil society organizations, regional and international experts, I also want to acknowledge the International IDEA and other organizers for convening this very important dialogue. And good morning, Lena. It is really important that we collaborate and we share knowledge in strengthening governance. As you've heard Lena say, women's equal participation and leadership in political and public life are essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. However, data shows that women are still underrepresented, not only women, but also those of minority communities. Balanced political participation and power sharing between men and women in decision-making is the internationally agreed target set in the Beijing Declaration and the Platform for Action. And we live in an era where equality is a right, it's not a privilege. Yet when we look at the makeup of many of our parliaments, and in particular, I speak about parliaments in our region, we see a glaring absence of voices that truly represent the diversity of the societies that we are meant to serve, particularly in parliament. And it's an imbalance that we cannot afford to ignore any longer. And I just heard Lena say that it took Finland 100 years to get 47% women representation. That we don't have that much time. While many countries have made strides towards greater equality, the numbers tell a story of slow progress, particularly when it comes to gender. In 2023, only 26% of the world's parliaments of the world's parliamentarians were women, and this is a significant gap. And the figures do not fully capture the intersectionality of representation. We must acknowledge that within this figure, women from racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic minorities are even more underrepresented. And why does this matter? Well, the lack of women and indeed diverse voices in our parliaments mean that critical issues such as healthcare, education, climate change, labor rights, social justice are not being addressed in ways that reflect the full breadth of human and lived experience. When decisions about policies are made by a narrow demographic, those policies are inevitably less likely to take into account the needs and perspectives of all citizens. Now, let's take a moment to consider this. Women make up half of the world's population, and yet we're still fighting to ensure that their voices and experiences are not only heard, but valued in the spaces where decisions are made. We need more women in positions of power, not because women are inherently better leaders, because leadership is not determined by gender, but because it is essential for democracy that our representatives reflect the communities that they serve. So what do you think a more diverse parliament would look like? It would look like the people it represents. In such a parliament, policy decisions would consider the lived experiences of women, of racial minorities, and other marginalized groups. Healthcare policies would be shaped by those who have firsthand knowledge of the challenges faced by women in accessing care, particularly reproductive health services. Laws concerning equal pay and sexual harassment will benefit from the expertise of women and people of diverse backgrounds, ensuring that they are crafted to serve the most vulnerable in society. And the diversity of voices fosters the innovation and creativity that we need in decision-making processes. Studies have shown that diverse teams perform better, that inclusive leadership leads to more sustainable and effective policies. This is the power of representation. When we make room for people from different walks of life, we are making room for better solutions to our society's most pressing problems. But why are there still so few women in our parliaments? The barriers are many and deeply rooted, and all of you know what some of those barriers are. These include societal expectations of gender roles, financial challenges, political violence, and a lack of mentorship for women in politics. Political structures and processes are often designed in ways that unconsciously disadvantage women and minority groups. And in many countries, political parties have been slow to embrace change, and in others, outright resistance remains. Too often, women are still viewed as secondary players rather than key political agents. So what can we do to rectify this? One powerful tool, as you've heard already from Lena, has been proven to drive change is the implementation of TSMs. And these are targeted and, most importantly, time-limited interventions aimed at accelerating parity and social inclusion. TSMs include quotas, reserved seats, and other mechanisms designed to ensure that women and those representing marginalized groups are included in decision-making bodies, particularly during the transition to a more equitable system. Now, some have argued with me and said, well, these measures are nothing more than affirmative action, that they give undue advantage to certain groups. But the truth is, these measures are not about giving anyone an unfair advantage. They're about leveling the playing field. In many parts of the world, women face a significant disadvantage in entering politics due to embedded and structural inequalities. And TSMs is one of the ways to correct this imbalance, to ensure that women have the opportunity to bring their perspectives to the table. We've heard about Rwanda, of course. But, to be clear, TSMs are not meant to be permanent. They are designed to be temporary, to help us bridge the gap that has been created by decades, even centuries of exclusion. Over time, as we build more inclusive structures and dismantle systemic barriers, the needs for TSMs will diminish. But in the meantime, these measures are vital. And I just wanted to stop at this juncture and just, in case you forgot, we at the National Federation Party, and I don't mean to go into a political speech about this, but we were very proud. I personally was very proud that we were the first party ever to have a transgender candidate stand in the last elections. And of course, we faced pushback from within the party itself and then from the wider public because of the thought that you have a transgender in your party as a candidate, that means you're going to legalize same-sex marriage. Far from it. But this is the whole reason that I'm so grateful for this chance to have this conversation. So by implementing TSMs, we can ensure that women are not merely passive recipients of policies, but active creators of them. Women bring invaluable perspectives, and so do those who represent marginalized communities, from maternal health to education, from childcare to workplace. If we fail to include them in the decision-making process, we are missing out on vital solutions to the challenges we face as a society. But there is another side of the coin. While TSMs are designed to increase the representation of women in parliament, it's important to recognize that simply having more women in positions of power does not guarantee that they will advocate for the interests of women or marginalized groups. We all know that. Women in politics, like any other politician, are influenced by a variety of factors such as party allegiance, personal beliefs, and political ideologies. A woman in power may still uphold policies that are harmful to women's rights or fail to prioritize gender equality, especially if those policies align with the broader political agenda she supports. Therefore, the focus should not solely be on the quantity of women in parliament, but also ensuring that the women in leadership positions are genuinely committed to advancing the issues that matter the most to women and marginalized communities. Representation alone does not always translate to meaningful change. So the call to action is, the time is now. Our parliaments, our political structures, and as we look forward to the incoming elections of your local councillors, your town mayors, even the bringing back of the elections for the Sugarcane Growers Council, this is where we can start. This is where we can start. And I know that many of our 15% of our sugarcane farmers are women, and they want to be represented on their own council. In our local town councils, we need more women there. It starts with our political parties as well. And I'm glad to see representatives of political parties here. We need more women in leadership roles, more marginalized voices in our decision-making bodies, and more commitment to creating a political environment where equality is not just a slogan, but a lived reality. Temporary special measures, in my belief, are not a step backward. They're a step toward justice, toward equity, toward a future where every person, regardless of your gender, your race, your background, has an equal opportunity to shape the policies that will eventually affect your own lives. Thank you for your attention.
Honorable Ngere commitment, inclusion, and democracy that represents our communities. Very loud, that's echoing in terms of how we must and should move forward. Our next speaker pause, who will take us or deep dive into the work around Pacific and looking at inclusion and looking at commitment is Dr. Karen Baker. She's a fellow at the Department of Pacific Affairs from the Australian National University and a leading expert in Pacific politics. Her research focuses on gender equality, political representation, and the role of temporary special measures in fostering inclusive governance. Dr. Baker has published extensively on women's political participation in the Pacific region and has provided invaluable policy advice to governments and international organizations. Her work bridges academic research and practical solutions. That's what we're looking for. Making her a pivotal figure in the fight for gender equality in political systems. Dr. Baker's insights and expertise have shaped policies and inspired countless individuals to advocate for a more inclusive and equitable society. We're incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Baker with us today to share her knowledge and a vision for a more inclusive future. Please make her welcome.
Thanks very much for that warm welcome. Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate the presence of Honourable Leonora Kikitambua, Honourable Sashi Kiran, and all of the distinguished guests here. Just to give you some background about me, I'm an academic, not a practitioner, although I try to bridge that divide between theory and practice. My PhD research was on this topic, temporary special measures, and in particular their use in the Pacific. So I looked at the implementation in Papua New Guinea, in Bougainville, in the French Pacific, and in Samoa. And what I found was very similar to what Lena was saying with their IDEA database on temporary special measures. In fact, the use is more widespread than you think. And there's some really interesting, really innovative ways in which temporary special measures have been used, even within the Pacific region, that I think provide really important and valuable lessons for how to move forward in this space. So I have a few slides. I'm hoping we can pop them up. There we go. If we can just move to the next slide. Yep, awesome. So what are temporary special measures? Apologies if you already know this, but I think there is a lot of confusion, a lot of misinformation out there about exactly what temporary special measures entail. So at their heart, they're policy tools designed to target these inequities in representation, particularly for women, but also for all underrepresented groups, because the reality is there's a lot of underrepresented groups, particularly when it comes to politics. So usually TSMs work by implementing a minimum threshold for the representation of a particular societal group. And that threshold can come into play in a lot of different ways, which we'll talk about. So they are a really useful policy measure, but as other speakers have said, they're not intended to be permanent. Often temporary special measures have a sunset clause or have another mechanism that means eventually we hope that they won't be necessary anymore when these inequities they're designed to address have been taken care of. Can we go to the next slide, please? So you've probably all seen this graphic. It's often used when talking about temporary special measures in particular. This movement from an idea of equality where everyone is treated the same to an equity approach where measures are implemented to even the playing field to allow everyone the same chance. If you've seen this graphic, you probably often, you know that often there's a third panel, the justice panel, which is where the fence has been removed, where the structural barrier has been removed, and these special measures aren't necessary anymore. But TSM they're targeting the equity stage. We're not at the justice stage yet. TSMs are designed to be the bridge to get us there. Next slide, please. So why do we need TSM? Across the world, this is a global issue. Politics is dominated by a certain subset of the community. So it's usually men, they're usually a bit older than the general population, and they usually have more access to resources. This is the inequity that TSMs are fundamentally designed to address. They're often targeted at gender because women are notably underrepresented. In the world, as of 1st of January this year, 27% of parliamentarians are women, but in the Pacific, that figure is only 8%. So the Pacific is on the lower end of the scale in terms of women's representation when we take a global perspective. There's also other groups, of course, that have struggled to make significant inroads in terms of particularly political representation. So young people, gender diverse communities, ethnic minorities are all generally underrepresented in politics. And this has an impact on how laws are passed, what laws are passed, and why they are passed. And it has a broader impact than that as well, because you can see really clearly these trends are also reflected in political participation. If voters can't see themselves reflected in parliaments, they're less likely to vote, they're less likely to aspire towards a political career, they're less likely to engage in politics on a day-to-day basis. And so you see this inequality in representation just compound all the way down the political system. That's why it's really important to target representation because it flows into all of these other domains as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a table reflecting that dynamic we were talking about. So this is women's representation in Pacific politics as of the 1st of January. You might know there's been an election since then in Vanuatu, and those results, the final results are expected next week, but we're not expecting that number to increase. It's probably more likely to go down. Across the Pacific, you see quite a variation in terms of the number of women in parliaments, and these are just the independent states. But overall, no country in the Pacific is at that 27% average globally, and there are really significant disparities in women's representation across the region. Fiji's there just right in the middle. It used to be at the top, but as you know, there's been a decline in women's representation. So, all right, next slide, please. So types of temporary special measures. Temporary special measures is this umbrella term that includes a huge range of policy interventions. So we've got statutory interventions. These are legislative measures that target parties. So laws that say parties have to have a certain number of candidates, for example, that are women or representatives of other underrepresented groups, or other measures that parties have to comply with by law. You also have party-based temporary special measures, which are more voluntary measures that parties adopt in their own internal systems. You have this huge group that I've called thresholds, which is basically any kind of legislation that creates specific seats or a minimum level of representation in a political body. So there's a whole lot of different mechanisms there, which we'll talk about. And then, of course, within each of these categories, there's a huge amount of different approaches that have been taken. So there's a lot of potential ways to go when we're talking about TSM, but that's the real strength of the concept. It means that in every political context, there are particular pathways that make sense within that context that are appropriate to that country, to that institution. All right, next slide, please. So I want to go through different examples from the Pacific region, because as I said, a lot of different approaches have been tried, and there are benefits and sometimes drawbacks to these approaches that are specific to the context that they have been introduced in, but they do provide a lot of lessons more broadly. So I'm going to go through all of these one by one, just to talk a little bit about the specifics of each different TSM model that's been used. So next slide, please. The first is party list quotas. So these have been used in the French Pacific territories of New Caledonia, French Polynesia, and Wallis and Futuna. These aren't laws that were introduced in the Pacific. They're actually colonial laws. So the French government has passed these constitutional amendments called the parity laws, and these have applied throughout all of France and all of the French territories. But with that said, in the Pacific, they're applied in a very particular way because of the electoral system. The French Pacific territories use an open list proportional representation, a closed list proportional representation electoral system. And in this style of electoral system, the parity laws mean you have a zipper. So if the first person on your party list is a man, the second has to be a woman, then the third is a man, then the fourth is a woman, all the way down. The party lists have to be gender equal. In some of the mainland France political systems, they have targets to meet the parity law, but if you can't meet them, maybe the party pays a fine, or there's another kind of way that parties can get around not actually adhering to the spirit of the law. That's not the case in these list PR systems. If you don't meet that criteria, if you don't have a zippered list, your party doesn't get registered for that election. So the penalties for non-compliance with the parity law in the French Pacific territories are very strict. And what that means in practice is you have a huge amount of women in the French Pacific assemblies. 52% of the New Caledonian Congress are women, 49% in the French Polynesian Assembly. It's a bit lower in the Wallis and Futuna Assembly, it's 25%, but that's still pretty high when we're talking about the regional and the global averages of women's representation. The reason for that disparity is just the strength of the party system. So New Caledonia and French Polynesia have very strong party systems. Wallis and Futuna, it's a lot more flexible. You have 20 seats in that assembly and you'll have up to 20 parties represented. So often your party list, you're only getting one or maybe two people through on that list. So in practice, it means that if most of the party lists are headed by men, you're not getting the same amount of women in that you'd get in other systems. But regardless, there is this is a very, very effective gender quota. As I said before, it wasn't introduced within these countries. It was imposed from outside in many ways. But it should be noted that a lot of women in these territories advocated really strongly for this law to come in. They were very supportive of the introduction of parity. And you can see the kind of the results that they've had from this. There's a lot of caveats here. It relies on a strong party system. It has these very, very strict enforcement mechanisms, but it has led to, some of the highest representation levels, certainly in the region, but even in the world in these French Pacific territories. All right, next slide, please. So then you have a different approach. This is the statutory TSMs that we were talking about. Laws that mandate requirements or inducements in terms of party nominations to encourage parties to nominate more women candidates in elections. We can see different models of this in the region. Solomon Islands has a provision in its Political Parties Integrity Act that includes a 10% minimum level of women's representation on party candidate lists. So basically, parties are supposed to nominate at least 10% women candidates. But we talked about the strict penalties for non-compliance in the French Pacific case. That does not apply in Solomon Islands. Actually, parties can just say, oh, we tried to find women candidates, but we couldn't find enough. And so in reality, not a lot of parties actually meet this threshold in every election. In the 2024 elections, only 4 parties out of the 13 that stood actually endorsed more than 10% women candidates. So the goal is there, but the lack of penalties for non-compliance means that it's not necessarily adhered to a lot of the time. In Papua New Guinea, you have a different approach. In their organic law on the integrity of political parties and candidates, there's a provision there that if a party endorses a woman candidate who wins more than 10% of the vote in her electorate, they're refunded 75% of her campaign expenses. So it's not a requirement, it's more of an inducement here, saying if you find very competitive women candidates, they don't have to win, but if they win a significant proportion of the vote, then there's a financial inducement there for parties to support those women candidates. I should note that I've heard that in practice, it's very hard to get this refund of expenses through. There's a few hurdles to pass there, but it is a different kind of approach that might encourage parties to endorse more women. Next slide, please. Then you have the reserve seats model, which is probably the model that's most familiar to a lot of people in talking about TSM. This is a useful approach because it doesn't require much. You're essentially just adding on seats to an existing political system, right? It's potentially the easiest model to introduce, but you're adding on seats. So there are financial implications to that. There are implications in terms of the number of seats in the House, the number of votes that you need to pass laws in that legislature now. So there are a whole range of things to consider in terms of reserve seats, but they have been used quite successfully in the region, in the autonomous region of Bougainville, where there are 3 reserve seats for women, alongside 3 reserve seats for ex-combatants. So these seats represent a different part of the autonomous region. So there's a woman's representative for North, Central and South Bougainville, as well as an ex-combatant representative. And those representatives are voted for by the whole electorate. So both men and women get a vote for who that representative is. But then that representative is given the responsibility to advocate for the woman of that area. Importantly, there's also a reserve seat for a woman in the cabinet of Bougainville. So it's not just that there's guaranteed to be 3 women in the House, there's guaranteed to be at least 1 woman minister as well. And that's a really important provision in the Bougainville Constitution there. So in addition to the 3 reserve seats, there's also been 3 women who have successfully been elected to open seats in the Bougainville House of Representatives. So Josephine Getzi in 2015, Theonilla Matbob in 2020, and then Carol Polly, who won a by-election in 2022. So you can see the opportunities for women are slowly expanding over time, I think, as women's representation becomes, I guess, a bit more normalized. But it's still, not to the level of 50% or gender equality. And there's been indications now with the work that's been happening in terms of designing a new constitution for Bougainville, that those 3 reserve seats will stay in place for the time being. All right, next slide, please. So you have a different model used in Samoa, a model that I think is quite innovative. it's called a safety net. Another term for it in the global literature is best loser, but I really like that term. I think safety net is a lot nicer and more reflective of how the system works. So in a safety net system, what happens is there's a minimum threshold of women's representation. In Samoa, it's 10%. The Constitution says at least 10% of seats in Parliament need to be taken up by women. And so how that happens is in a general election, nothing happens. It just runs as normal. Women contest the same seats as men. They run, they are elected or not. And after an election, the Electoral Commission assesses. If there's more than 10% women's representation in the new parliament, that's great, nothing happens. If there's less than that threshold, then that's when the quota kicks in. So additional seats are added to the parliament, and those seats are taken up by the unsuccessful women candidates who polled the highest number of votes in that election. So essentially, it's a bit of a second chance, but it means that there is a lot of incentive to support women candidates, because if you support the quota system, you support more women's representation in general. If you oppose the quota system, you don't necessarily want to see it used. So you want more than 10% women to be elected in any general election, so that provision doesn't kick in. It's not designed to be temporary in the sense that it's a constitutional provision that stays in the Constitution, but it is designed to be temporary in that if regularly more than 10% of Parliament is made up of women, then that quota provision never kicks in. It just kind of fades out because it's not needed anymore. So I think this model is a really interesting one. There are some complicated facets to it around the different size of parliament, which can change from election to election. And there was a lot of controversy around the provisions of the gender quota in relation to the last general election in Samoa, which we'll talk about a bit soon. But overall, it's quite an original system, not just in the region, but in the world. And it's also been adopted in different ways in Vanuatu. So municipal councils have a similar safety net system, but that's with a fixed number of seats. So the number of seats always stays the same, but in every ward, you have a reserve seat for women that's taken up by the highest polling unsuccessful woman candidate from that election. So that's a different way of doing it, where the number of seats always stays the same. In Vanuatu, they actually introduced a regular reserve seat system similar to Bougainville in these town councils to begin with, but then they came up against a constitutional hiccup, because that means 2 ballot papers. You have your regular ward member and your reserve seat. So every voter was marking 2 ballot papers, and that's not necessarily what the Constitution says about elections. So when that came up the first time they used it, they switched to this different model. That's, I think it reflects some of the challenges you come up against when you're trying to legislate for temporary special measures, but also the flexibility of TSMs as a concept, in that you can kind of adjust for these constitutional specificities that arise. So these are the different kinds of safety net systems that are used in the region. Next slide, please. So I wanted to end with, I guess, the most broad-ranging, the most wide-reaching TSM measures that are used in the Pacific region at the moment, which is again in Bougainville, the Bougainville Community Government Act, which is also quite a world-leading piece of legislation, I think, in terms of the TSM measures that it introduces. Bougainville's Community Government Act creates local government structures that are gender equal by design, so that gender parity is embedded in these community government structures. It means that each ward has 2 representatives. They elect a woman and a man to represent that community. Those ward members form a community government, and the community government must also elect a gender equal leadership team. So if the chair is a man, the deputy chair is a woman, and those positions have to switch at the next term. So if you have a male chair for one term, the next term, your chair is a woman and your deputy chair is a man. So at all levels in the community governments of Bougainville, this gender equality is ensured. It's quite a dramatic, I guess, form of TSM, but it's interesting that the evolution of kind of Bougainville's approach to TSM has led to this point. You know, in their 2004 constitution, they introduced the reserve seats for the House of Representatives. Those have been successful, although maybe not worked as fast as people might have thought in terms of opening the door for more women's representation. And so when it came to designing these community governments, the Bougainville Executive Council opted for greater women's representation, for stricter measures around gender parity. It's also interesting the way that it's worked in practice. We're now in the 2nd term of Bougainville community governments, and in the 1st term, almost all the chairs who were appointed were men. So you had these gender equal community governments, but ultimately I think all but 2 or 3 of the chairs of those community governments were men. But that's fine, because the 2nd term came along and now almost all of the community governments are chaired by women, because of these leadership provisions that are there. So these are kind of, I guess, I'm hoping to illustrate how diverse the range of temporary special measures that have been implemented in the Pacific are, how wide-ranging they are. There's in parliaments of independent countries, in these subnational legislatures at all levels, you see different forms, different types, different results in terms of the TSMs that have been introduced. So there is a lot going on in the space in the Pacific. There's a lot of interesting lessons to be learned from all of these different approaches. Next slide, please. There's also a lot of challenges in implementing TSMs. They can be really controversial. They can face a lot of resistance from various angles in terms of their, I guess, their perception as a threat to the political order. On the left there, this is a cartoon from a Samoan newspaper when their 10% safety net TSM was introduced. It's kind of this idea that encouraging more women to get into politics would necessarily mean that they're neglecting their domestic duties. So one of a kind of a range of cartoons on this theme actually at the time. This is a pretty standard kind of, I guess, objection to TSMs that come up. There was also a more recent controversy in Samoa after the last election, when the gender quota, essentially, there were 2 differing interpretations of the gender quota legislation, owing to the drafting of it, which was a bit vague. And this meant that the difference between election results, essentially, if you were going for a more generous interpretation of the quota versus a more restrictive interpretation of the quota, the election would have turned out very differently. So this is I guess, a lesson in the care that needs to be taken in drafting these provisions around TSM, but also it's an interesting, I guess, case study in how to deal with a potential backlash like this. In Samoa, there was a suggestion after the election that the TSM provision in the constitution should be done away with. That they recommended that it be abolished. In large part around the controversy that happened at the election. That didn't happen. So the TSM provision is still in the Constitution with a recommendation that it be reworded to be a bit clearer. But there is, there are things do come up, but it's important to have that kind of that broader support, I guess, for TSM to get through it. The other image on here is from a news article around a proposal in Vanuatu for TSM in Parliament. This proposal had a lot of opposition to it, generally based around the idea that it wasn't the idea wasn't coming from Vanuatu. It wasn't coming from New Vanuatu women. It was being imposed from outside. And I think that's a really important lesson in terms of the challenges of implementation as well. If the TSM model that's being proposed doesn't make sense for the context, then it's not going to get very far. Being able to create a broad base of support, being able to explain why this model of TSM makes sense for the context is really important, and having political leaders who can go into bat for the proposal is really important as well. All right, next slide, please. So this is my last slide. I've done a lot of research on TSMs, and I generally think in most cases they do make sense. That it's important, particularly where women's representation is not increasing gradually over time. It's important where there is a relatively low base with where TSMs can be a push to at least guarantee a minimum level of women's representation while we wait for that kind of natural growth over time to increase. But they can be really controversial. They can require a lot of political capital. These are the reasons why you don't, I guess, hear a lot about TSMs in the Pacific, although, as I talked about, there's a lot of models that are working really well. And they do work. They're a really fast, a really effective means of increasing the political representation of underrepresented groups. There are a lot of proven advantages to TSM models. They create a role model effect. It flows down into that those rates of political participation, political efficacy, which is the feeling like you can make a difference, like politics is open to you. They can also actually change policies and laws. And we've seen this in New Caledonia, for example, since the parity laws were implemented. The amount of state resourcing to women's agencies has increased. The amount of time that gender issues are discussed in the Congress has increased. Where women elected just after the parity laws in both New Caledonia and French Polynesia tended to be younger, tended to be more educated. You're creating a more diversity in representation than just bringing in women. So there is evidence, not just globally, but in the Pacific, there's evidence that TSMs work. I guess the other important Element of it, though, alongside this evidence base, alongside the political capital, is the window of opportunity. Often a campaign for TSMs needs an opening. In Bougainville, it was the constitution-making process, and then it was the redesign of the local government system. There are more opportunities for change when it's part of a broader process. So I think I might leave it there. I'm really interested to hear about whether this resonates or which parts do and which parts don't in the Fiji context. But yeah, happy to answer any questions about the other regional models. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karen. Context, complexities, and a few governments or nations are already on it. So maybe it's the time for us to learn from each other, across the oceans, and how we share lessons learned and how can we make it better. I would like now to call upon Rajan from the International IDF Fiji office for a few words of thanks.
Good morning, everyone. I've been tasked to give a vote of thanks. And first of all, I'd like to thank our chief guest, Honorable Lenora Geringarentabua, for accepting our invitation and making time during the standing committee meetings, etc., to be here. So this shows her commitment towards this topic. And we are very grateful to have you, madam, here. I'd like to also thank Honorable Shashi Kiran, Minister for Women, also availing herself. She has just walked out after listening to Ms. Baker. And it also shows her commitment towards women's rights and political participation. I'd also like to thank Dr. Karen Baker to come here in Fiji and deliver this speech. I have worked with Dr. Karen Baker online for a couple of years for the same webinar she joined online. And I'm glad that she's here today in person to deliver her keynote address. I would like to also acknowledge the presence of Honorable Rinesh Sharma, who has also taken up time to be part of this conversation from the standing committee meeting that is happening. And I'm really grateful for your presence here, sir. Also, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of the political party reps who are in this room, who have accepted our invitation to contribute in this dialogue. I'd like to also thank members of the CSO who are in the room, members from the academia, and our friends who believe in this topic. This room is full with a lot of creative minds, and I hope that we all will have a fruitful discussion and we can make gather something out from the discussions, and we can have some sort of a move for Fiji for our future. Thank you very much.
Everyone, good morning. First and foremost, I just want to thank ID International and also the organizers for inviting Fiji Women's Rights Movement to be part of this good conversation and very critical conversation as we are, 1 year from, the most important year. So before I go in to give my contributions of from what we think in terms of the topic around temporary special measures, just wanted to give a briefer about who we are. Fiji Women's Rights Movement is a national feminist organization, and we believe in women's equal representation at all levels of decision making and leadership spaces. Because for us, it's paramount to achieving true gender equality. So at the backdrop of the work that we do is the dominance of traditional, cultural, and religious attitudes among Fijian community, which impacts progress for women. Due to traditional gender roles and that favor men, women are always not seen as leaders or as not seen to be capable leaders. Their role is seen in the traditional home setting, where it's considered as women's domain of responsibility. But even in those spaces, the decision making in the home is limited to the head of the home. And in traditional homes, it's usually the man. So years of that type of, social conditioning has created a situation where we see now, not only in Fiji, but in the Pacific context as well, where women are not seen as effective leaders in all spaces. It ranges even from leadership in the home, the community, the national, regional, and international levels, and it even exists in workplaces and online spaces. And so my conversation this morning is just validating some of the comments from the guest speakers, and in the second second presentation, you would have seen a list of the Pacific Island country in terms of the representation of women in their parliaments, which is very low. Doesn't even go past 7. So for us, in terms of answering the first question, which is what the organizers have sent us, is how would you assess the current level of inclusive governance in Fiji? So for us, is when we look at it, in terms of legislative and policy development environment, we are good. There's like the National Action Plan on Women's Economic Empowerment, you have the National Action Plan on Preventing Violence Against Women, you have the Institutional Capacity Development Initiative, so making governments gender responsive. So those are some of the good wins. But when you look at it in terms of women in leadership in all spaces, we have regressed significantly. So I won't go over the stats, but I'm speaking to people who have much more experience than me in this topic. But if you look at it in terms of like data across the Pacific, for example, we are not even scratching 30%. Feminist organization and women's organization now are asking for 50% representation, but we've not even reached 30%, which is what the original cry was for. And so we're not there. So we wanted to see from FWM, why is this happening? Why are people not seeing women as leaders or have the capacity to be leaders? So we did a research in 2022, a perception study, and it's also available on our website, so I won't go over the detail because I know I'm within the time constraints, but I'll just share with you maybe 5 key findings. People's perception. So this was a study not just looking at women's responses to our study, but we did men, women, anyone who could respond to our survey. So they said that honesty, fairness, and humility were the top 3 leadership traits that they would want to see in a leader, and that it applies equally to men and women. And they say that when they're looking for a leader, those are just the 3 things that they want to see. And they also said that one big thing that puts women at a disadvantage is around gender stigmatization. That's like the stereotyping, the prejudice, the discrimination. It decreases the opportunities for women to become leaders. So from our survey, they think women are capable. It's not about quality, it's not about capacity, it's just that there's existing biases or gender, what we call gender discrimination stereotype, that decreases the chances for women to become leaders. Some of them also said that cultural influence and leadership styles in Fiji is also another impact to why women are not considered as leaders. Religion also plays a part, and also the political climax that we were at when we did this survey has an impact on how people actually decide who they want as their leaders. We also did a board's research, so we looked at like state-owned enterprises. So these are like boards across different areas. So we surveyed about 191 boards, and we found that women were very low. It was scratching scratching the surface at about 20%, which is about 49 women in these different boards. And if you look at it, only 7% of them were actually in some sort of leadership role. And some of the women that were in this state-owned boards, they were like, they kept on being re-elected. So it also reflected the lack of diversity in the boards. We did an update in 2022, the rates were very bad. We did another update in 2023. In terms of women in boards was also very poor and actually went down. So you see across the board, whether it's from the home, whether it's from political arena, state-owned enterprises and different spheres, women are not represented fairly. So the conversation around temporary special measures, I'll just end by saying that I think it's needed. And if we are committed in the different international commitment documents that we sign on to as a country, the different laws that we do, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, come up with all this big declaration. If we are committed to saying that we want to see more women in leadership position, then we need to be intentional. And this could be one of that, making sure that there's some form of affirmative action that ensures women are able to, access some of the opportunities that men have access to for years. And whether this will work or not, this requires a lot of civil education, because a lot of arguments will come in, right? In terms of, having quotas is undemocratic, or having quotas is discriminatory towards men. But if you look at it in terms of historical injustice that women have gone through, affirmative action is needed so that women have a chance. So for us as FFRM, we'll support that, and we're very excited to have this conversation. More importantly, to hear about what our roadmap is in the afternoon session. And I think with that, I'm approaching my 7 minutes, so I'll end with that.
First of all, I would like to thank the landowners of the land and for helping us attend to this very critical discussion. Thank you, IDE, for inviting us as a political party. First, I would like to say the headline is Exploring TSM. So there are two different types of issues here. TSM is a temporary, temporary asking for something. The other one is called the doctrine of necessity. For us as Social Party, we were a recipient of this TSM, we otherwise call coup d'etat. So where certain people make certain decisions to push an agenda for something they believe in. Now, that being said, we need to be very careful. We also have our traditional system that is also available, which is the Talano, and that is consultation. So if we're going to do anything in regards to TSM, consultation has to be very much part and parcel of this discussion. Consultation across the board on every areas because the different cultures and different mindset, different economic perspective and things, all these things have to be taken in place before we even start, because it says here, exploring TSM. So before we even start thinking of it, we need to make sure we draw some parameters in regards to the TSM. That being said, so we would like to say in Sotalpa, for the women in politics, we have it enshrined in our political party's constitution. And we've had a lot of women representatives since 2006. In the last two elections, we've had 7 women, which is 13%. In 2018, 2022, we had 11 women that represented the party, and in this next election, we are going to have 25 women, which is around 45% of the 5% or 10% more than the SDG requirement. With that being said, one thing that we've noticed, that the women do not support women. This is something very important that I think the TSM has to be made to women to start supporting women, because if you're going to do something like a TSM to have a quota, then it has to be collectively agreed by women. We had in 2018, our party leader was a woman, Ramorama Rotemumu. Only 5% were women that voted, the rest were all men that voted for her. So this is something that has been happening and something that we need to take care of before we start putting legislator or coup our party parliamentary representative. So that's all I can share right now. The other thing is, we are not new to this TSM. Affirmative action has always been there in parliamentary legislation. The affirmative action for indigenous people that came along, that is a TSM. Even just a couple of weeks ago, Donald Trump did a TSM for TikTok in America, giving 75 days for it to be reintroduced or redone again in America. So the only thing that we are talking from the party perspective, we need more consultation, a general discussion between all groups, and of course we need to share it with our somebody Marama to discuss it and more. Thank you very much.
Bulavinaka, Namaste, Assalamualaikum, and a very good morning to you all. Thank you for having me here on this panel today. I'd like to share my journey of the realities that you face during elections. As a member of parliament, it's been 2 years now. I'll go to the TSM aspect and why we vote. When I entered politics, I filled a form, stood in a line, and I applied just like I did to many conferences. And I got shortlisted. I had an interview with the former AG for the first time. 1 hour, 25 minutes, one-on-one, and I told him about the dream I had for this nation. And I got selected. I went into elections. I was late by 2 weeks because I was with my dad for his surgery in India. At short of time, I spent $0 in campaigning. And when I held the mic and I spoke, people, I connected with people, and I got 1,700 votes. As a first time out. No backing of political connections, financial connections. So now when I look back, when I get asked, when I reflect, I feel like I've broken a lot of barriers for youth to step into parliament. And the vision is to create an ecosystem or platform where more youth come at a younger age and do it better than us, or better than I did. Because it's all about nation building. So the 2 years has been very grateful. You have challenges that come your way. I was initially, criticized that my speeches are being written. Never that was done for me. Because I don't write my speeches. Even when the Hansard would ask for my speech, it's all in point form. Because prior to coming to politics, I used to conduct trainings for agriculture. So when I conduct a session, I'm on the floor for 4 and 5 hours straight, constantly talking, engaging with the crowd. So that I had my practice done, and I've sort of trained over 13,000 people in the last 5 years. During the pandemic, I got the Bill and Melinda Gates COVID grant, first 5 in the world. I got the grants from UNDP, and I thought that if I can run an NGO and contribute to the nation, I had a dream to work in Parliament and do it as a member of Parliament with something I manifested, I worked towards, and I got in. Last year, I got on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and Honorable Lenora is the chair, and we all scrutiny in terms of providing solutions and going forward. Now, when I look at TSM, took very special measures. We had a women mock parliament. This year we have a youth mock parliament, and I'm encouraging as many youths to participate. Come and feel the energy, the ambience, the atmosphere in our parliamentary space. Because our civil service is made up of majority of the youths, but I always try and tell them, dream of one step higher, which is the parliamentary space. Now, my most loved person is my mother. I have my most heated debates with her before I got into parliament, and we still do. And she's very big on women issues, and she always tells me, son, you can speak of us and about us. So we should normalize men representing women issues as well, which I have done through my parliamentary debates. In terms of women participation, I understand that there are traditional norms or beliefs that women's place sort of in the kitchen, being a housewife, looking after a family. So when we say women in leadership roles, somewhere along the line we do undermine women who are content taking care of the family, because that was raised to me as well. Women in leadership does not only mean women in politics, CEO, directors. A woman, it's all about being content as well. But yes, we need more representatives in these spaces. So there's systematic barriers as well, although I believe chapter 3, part B, provision 53 says that, of our constitution says that we have a multi-member open list proportional representation system when it comes to our elections. So anyone can participate, but why do not women participate is the question. Something the member sitting next to me highlighted that look at the level of harassment and violence. Let's look at social media. Let's talk about the realities. Look at how Honorable Lenora's name was tarnished on social media, Honorable Linda, and the memes you see about Honorable Sashi Kiran. And you have not just men, but women commenting on it, all sorts of garbage and rubbish. So forget about voting for women, look at how they're degrading, annihilating a woman's character. Because when you can't attack a politician based on their policies, ideas, visions, you attack their character, and social media is an ocean to do that. And that's something I've been talking to the AG with, on how we can restrict, not ban, but restrict some of our networks, and the Online Safety Commission needs to be given more power, more funding. If you're threatening someone, tarnishing someone's character online, you should be taken to task. Period. So many girls get blackmailed as well, which has been a case, but they are not confident to come to authorities as well. They don't see authorities as a safe space to go and share my information. So it's not just so. It starts from there, from high school, tertiary level, and then coming into politics. Yes, we can adopt, there's the United Nations Convention for Elimination of Any Discrimination Against Women. We can adopt policies from there. Yes, we can have quotas or, seats aside for women and youths as well, but the question that is asked is, what is the quality? What is the quality? And why are we getting into politics? So, why do we vote? Is my last contribution to this. I believe when I see it from inside and outside, we are voting for the wrong reasons, for most of us. Before we go and tick at the polls, we should ask ourselves, can this particular member change whatever the current structure is, has innovative ideas, solutions? Because when you become a minister, you just go and sit in and you have an entire your permanent secretary, your staff to do everything for you, even write your speeches. Yes, because you get your briefings from your permanent secretary. So it's all done and dusted for you. You are basically the representative of that department. But what innovative solutions can you bring that benefits the entire nation? Is the question we need to ask. Sometimes we get voted because, oh, he lives in my area, or he's has the same ethnicity with me, he goes to the same church or temple, skin, hair, complexion, he wears a suit, or he or she looks good, he or she speaks well. But where is the content? Where is the substance? We voters always need to ask when taking in, is this person fair, transparent, has integrity, can provide accountability in moving forward? That's men, women, and youth. But overall, I would like to see policies and reforms where more women representation is there in Parliament, and especially more young voices come to Parliament. And it's one thing I've been putting to the Prime Minister of a Youth Innovation Summit, where key ideas are discussed with stakeholders, and it's one of the ways to stop the brain drain, but one of the ways to retain the talent that we have in this country and build this nation for better. Vinaka.
It's kind of difficult to follow on from the three presentations this morning. As mentioned by Sepesa, I'm Faye from Family Pacific, and for those of you who don't know, we're a feminist media organization. So what we basically do is use media to promote issues regarding women and most importantly to break down the patriarchal norms. Sounds like a mouthful, but TSM is right up the alley of what we do. I guess we've heard enough this morning about TSMs and why we should have TSMs. So I'll just move across and tell us why we need women in leadership, the benefits of having women in leadership. This is not my own, but from resources and from research. The benefits of female leadership is that they bring collaboration, they're better financially, they increase innovation, we encourage teamwork, we bring diverse perspectives, we improve performance, we have empathy and emotional intelligence, we are resilient, and we have perseverance, we have inclusive leadership, and role models. Now, these are all things that we women profess to have. And these are things that research people may say, yes, some women have it, some women don't have it, but that's the general idea, that when you have women in leadership, things will be a bit better. When Lisa was talking, she referred to the perception survey that FWRM had done. So I had looked through that, and one of the key findings that they had was that 91% of the respondents agreed that culture influences the leadership styles in Fiji. That was second to education being the important criteria. And then the third was age. Interestingly, we have one of the youngest members of parliament here. So that was the perception survey, and I just took the first four. The highest was education, culture, age, and honesty, fairness, and humility. These were characteristics that people, the respondents to the survey, were to leadership. So the question we ask ourselves, rightly placed by the General Secretary of the Social Party, why is it that women do not support women? The survey had mentioned culture. The survey had also mentioned education. The onus is on us women. That's what is being said. We also heard this morning about the fact that we need more equity. We need to have more systems in place that ensure women go into parliament. But not as temporary. Some of us believe that it should just be special measures, not something that can be, for now. This year is 30 years since the implementation of the Beijing Platform of Action, where women had big plans about having 50% of leadership. It's not 30 years. The question that women will be asking is, why? What happened? Why haven't we done this? Some of the answers we know, as alluded to in the survey. Culture is a big barrier. We need more women to be educated. The younger people, interestingly enough, in the recommendations of the same survey, younger people from the ages of 21 to 40 were more keen to changes, and they were looking at having people elected into parliament. They were more keen to engage. And I just went through very briefly the stats, the Bureau of Stats in Fiji. 56.8 are okay. This was the election 2017. 37.5 are Indo-Fijians, and the others are 4.5, or 2 ones 1.2. Does our electoral structure reflect the population that we have? So that when we have people speaking in parliament, they're representative of us. And then I also went through the analysis of ages in Fiji. From the ages of 25 to 60, there were more men. From 60 to and above, there were more women. So in essence, able population of Fiji, men were just 1,000 more than women in all the categories. So with all these facts that we have, culture is an important component, education is a must. The population ratio of people in Fiji, males are just 1,000 more than women. And then we look at the racial composition. The biggest question we ask is that, are the people in parliament representative of who we are as a nation? We want more women in parliament. So looking at the population of Fiji, that should be the case. We should have more women. But how do we get there? Considering the fact that we women are culturally, are going to vote according to culture. I'll give you an example. 2014, I stood as a candidate for what was known as the Indo-Fijian Party, the Fiji National Federation Party. I went in with all great dreams and visions. After the elections, I got very low votes. The first thing that I was told was, you were in the wrong party from people. Had you been in this other party, you may have gone into parliament. Culture, perceptions. I went in because I thought I was representing women. I was a member of the Women's Forum, one of the conveners. I wrongfully assumed that I was going in for women. Women have their own interests. We cannot say that just because you're a woman, you're going to be voted in by other women. There's the cultural context, there's the education context, there's all other. Then we have the different sectors of the community, the LGBTIQ, the people living with disability, the youth. So all these have to be taken into consideration when we talk about TSM. I love the conversation this morning where we talked about where we're looking at the different systems in the Pacific. Honestly, I love the French because of their parity. We have in the room representatives from a few political parties. What I loved about them was that if they do not adhere, then they are penalized, rather than just being left to, well, we couldn't get enough women, because that's been the response we've gotten in Fiji over the last 1970, it's now 55 years, 56 years of independence, I think. What has happened? We need to find a system that works for us. I mean, we know TSM, we know all that, but we need to find a system. If we're going to be, I put my time at 8 minutes, so I guess that's my time out. If we have to consider TSM in its real totality, we have to look at all the other, the culture, the education, the age disparities, the sector, the gender sectors that we have, and then we look at the age. But for the systems, my special preference is the gender parity. I don't know, and if you know, will dispute this about TSMs, that we should not have quotas for women, just because of the reasons I mentioned. We can't just have a woman in there. This is to be done very clearly. I was hoping the Electoral Commission will be here, because falling short of the people in Parliament, honourable ministers and the parliamentarians doing passing a law, I think the next step is for us to try and ask the Electoral Commission to maybe start looking at some of the ways that they can hold the party leaders to be more responsible in what they need to bring in as women. I've heard time and time again there's not enough women. But why? Technology facilitated gender-based violence. People like Honorable Linda being attacked. These are all the other psychological and emotional reasons why women don't go into parliament. But it's nice coming to have a talk first, but we also need to be more intentional in what we do. And I guess that's where I come in as a CSO person. Informing women as well as men in all the different languages what needs to change. If we want more women in leadership, why? People need to be given the reason and give them sound examples of why we need more women in leadership. I know people will say you should be talking about TSM and supporting TSM. I do support TSM, but it has to be looked at from all angles. We can't just say put more women in parliament. Take into account the context of the religious, cultural, and all the other contexts that we need to look at before we come to a place where we have a real intent of getting more women into leadership. I hope that has answered my directive for today. Good night.
Thank you so much, Faye. I'm not sure, Mr. Takayawa and Lisa. So I have a couple of questions before we open it up to the floor. This one is to Lisa about the perception survey and talking about systematic and cultural barriers. How do you think around that? How can we make it work? And talking about IT, can we have the other microphones volume up, please?
Yeah, the thing around culture and traditional and trying to change mindset, it's you try to change things that people have grown up with. So that just takes civil education. So if we are going to be, as a country, say that we're going to implement temporary special measures, whether it's through reserve seats or through party quota or any other system that would work for us, then we need to do a lot of civil education to let people know we're talking about elections. Let voters know why it is there. So that, and why you need women in leadership, whether in parliament or boards or in other spheres of influence. So that's how you change behavior, because behavior is learned. And so for us at FWA, we do a lot of gender sensitization training, where we go to different organizations that request for trainings, just for them to understand what's the difference between sex and gender, why sexual harassment is wrong, things like that. And it's a behavioral thing that it takes time for people to change. But if we want this to succeed in the next maybe like 20 years or so, then we need to start investing in more civic education around this.
Thank you, and I'll come to Mr. Takao before Honorable Sharma. You talked about the 25 women. Yes, in 25 women, I'm going to pose that how, moving forward to 2026, can we work together as political parties to ensure that this happens? And here in what Faye has just mentioned, that reason why are we putting women
So I want to just speak more on that. The issue of doing this, it gives the people the ability to see the leadership style or the leadership people. Because if you're going to write it as a rule, and we don't know the heart of the leader that's going into the, it'll be like cooked thing. But if you get a leader to pick and say, I want 25 women, that's intention. Like So our party leader has said his next election will have 25 women, and 25 women will come from the constituencies. Those are from the grass and the branches. They are brought up, their names are brought up from there. And we also have the Women Association, like in our party itself. We have a women's wing, which works with other women organizations in picking up people that comes, who are willing to stand. You know, mind you, being a politician in women is a financial burden. Like my mom said, when they see a politician, it's an ATM. So, you know, the women have to look after the family, do all these things. So they have to be economically, have the capacity to hold all these things. Fiji is not that level as female or any South, those countries in the north. The women are already has very good welfare system. They have good welfare money coming from them to pay for all those things. Fiji women, we have to look for things to pay for, sanitary stuff and all these kind of things. So we have to be realistic how we adopt overseas mindset with our economical standing right now. So the 25 is really giving it to the people to provide 25 women. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Sharma, I saw you shake your head when you heard about the ATM. And that you talked about young people and women and quoting or sharing with us your relationship with your mother. How has that how that drives the work that you do, especially for young people?
So the beautiful relationship I share is with my parents. So every time I come back home from my committee or parliament, my parents, they will update me of what's going on. Son, they said this, this said that. They're so informed now. And my mom always advises me about women issues or what can be done. My mom always told me, son, my dad was so strict that I could not go to school or go even out. Never had the freedom, to take risks, learn. And one of the reasons that's why I got retired. Happy to see her in a safe space at home. But I think one of the realities of politics is it's a popularity contest as well. It is. And also you have to be mindful in this context where if somebody sees what a current female MP or minister is going through, nobody would want to send their daughter or wife, because just campaigning, as Madam alluded, is so hectic. You finish at 3 a.m. in the morning, and next morning you're up at 8 a.m. So you really have to be out there, and regardless of all the women in leadership roles, the two things that politics demands is the ability to handle stress and pressure. For me, example, if I raise someone's issue, then I'll get criticized by a group of people, complaints are sent here and there. But I was doing my work as an MP raising someone's issue. They may not be able to see it, but I'm speaking for someone from, who's standing in their shoes. So even after a good parliamentary week or good day that finishes probably at 12 or 1 a.m. for me, I sleep less. Of course, that's the routine. But you get criticized for even the good you do, the bad you do. So I think they say thick skin, but no, thick skin doesn't really work. How much can someone absorb? I just spoke to someone who works with trauma and healing, and I said, that's the first thing members of parliament need, trauma and healing, workshops and all that, because the stress you go through, and then imagine having kids, having children, having grandkids, and you take that load to home, and how do you, show them you're the best dad, best grandfather. So things like that need to come in that space. Like when I go home, like I said, my parents would start updating me, or if somebody has criticized me, and these are all personal attacks. So I think that's something that really needs to, like Madam has alluded again, in all dynamics, we need to sort of restrict rules, bring in policies, and only then the women, the youth, the grassroots, the marginalized, the people with special needs, only then, they will rise. And when they do, the economy, the nation will automatically do well.
Faye, you talked about people with disability, those more disadvantaged than the rest of us, and with family amplifying their voices. But against the backdrop of the conversation we had earlier this morning about TSM and all the opportunities, how do you think that can be amplified and also working across the different schools of thought, the surveys, the research, and the propositions from different political parties going forward to 2026. Oh, by the way, just letting everybody know, we did approach all political parties and also the Fiji Elections Office to be present here today. We acknowledge the NFP and Fiji first for doing this and Faye, just that to
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. I think I forgot to mention that at Family Pacific, to use it very basic, when we have workshops, we must have as participants members of the GLBT community, disabled community members, young people, aging women. So we ensure that the different sectors, and then we go right down to the segregation of our data. So from that was where I was coming from in terms of, we look at the population of Fiji in a broader sense. We need to be representative of all. Very basic, maybe I'm living in utopia. There should be a seat for people living with disability. There should be a seat for people living, who are members of the LGBT community. We already have a young person. Bearing in mind that the ages 26 to 41 were the people that voted the most. And when you look at the population, they take up about 30% of the population of Fiji. Now, below that, people who are not ready yet to vote. So we look into the different sectors of our community. We could probably look into that. There are different seats allocated for different community members. Then again, it's a headache for elections. That's what we could have in utopia. But if we take it upon ourselves to ensure that the voices of all are heard, then we could do that. I don't know whether we have the time to do a consultation now, but for political parties, and I think I'm putting a lot on you, that when you're getting your candidates, try at least to have a balanced view, that you have representation from all sectors of Fiji's community. Because there's, I think, the people living with disability, their slogan is nothing for us without us. So how can we go and talk about them when we are not including one of them in Parliament? And the same for all other sectors. Women are crying for TSM, and I guess I've just increased the load for elections office and political parties and increased your headache, but hey, that comes with the territory. How to ensure that you are represented all members of the community. So to take families' way of looking at things, very basic, take it out to the broader context, ensuring that all members of the community, women make up 50% of the population. Why not have 50% of us being elected? That's why I love the French. Maybe they should come and have some talks with us. How do we get this when a political party doesn't give in the required list? They are deregistered, they're not allowed to. It's quite exciting, but yeah, I'm throwing it out to everybody else. And for us at FAMLINK, our role is just to educate, civic education through media and through all other forms of training and workshops. I hope it's answered your question.
Thank you, Faye. Round of applause to our panelists. Our commitment of working together, collaboration and inclusion. Everyone. Not just because you're pink, you're included, no, every color of the rainbow and more. So, do we have any questions? We have a microphone or two, and we have
questions online as well. So we have one for Mr. Takaya, one for Mr. Mbulitale. Oh, one each. Mr. Takaya, what role do political parties should play in ensuring greater gender equality and representation?
Thank you for the question. And like I said, the political parties has a constitution that guides them and how they operate. For inclusivity, most of it is coming under the Fiji Elections Office. So whatever we write in our constitution in terms of inclusivity, it is vetted by the Fijian Elections Office. So everything is there as you want for the vulnerables, for disabled community. It's all in there. So our constitution doesn't get passed unless it's passed by the Elections Office that complies with Fiji's 2013 constitution. And in terms of representative in the constitution and the parliament, we have to do a review of the constitution, and hopefully it's done soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is to Mr. Mulatari, looking ahead. What societal change, name at least one, which you believe urgently is needed to accelerate gender equality?
Like that question. There's so many, but one thing on the top of my head is one of the panelists kind of alluded to it, and it's all around unpaid care work. In our perception study, it also said that one of the reasons why women also don't contest is because they are contemplating between doing unpaid care work at home and actually contesting for elections or being part of different decision-making spaces. And in the perception study, it also said that if women who are interested to take leadership position have support from home, then they see them succeeding in leadership. And that is such a big testament to a lot of women are going through. So women are doing a lot of unpaid care work at home, right? You're cooking, you're cleaning, you're looking after children, you're doing all that. Who tells you to do that? You grew up because of how gender roles are prescribed to us when we are born. And I know women in this room, you leave here at 4, there's so many things, work doesn't end, you go back home, there's so many other things to do. So when people say, oh, why are there not enough women, because there's so many issues that women have to even, negotiate in the home, have the support from their families to be able to contest openly in the elections. And so I always say that the women that are currently, and the women that have served in parliament, those are good case studies to see how they've been able to negotiate at home in terms of redistribution of unpaid care work to be able to be part of leadership spaces. That's one. I have so many, but I'll stick to one. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience before we go to each of the panelists for a question each?
So there's 1, 2, do you have microphones available? Yes, please. One to the lady at the first table and one to Christina. Your name and your organization, who you directing your question to?
Sure. I'm Lydia Mlembalabu, and I'm here from the Alliance for Future Generations. I think my question is directed generally to the entire panel. So why don't women support women? I feel like this answer is pretty common sense, and a lot of people have raised this today. It's cultural societal norms, right? Women who were raised from little girls to support our parents, and then once we reach a certain age, we were taught to then eventually support our husbands, our partners in the future. We were never necessarily taught to support each other. If anything, we were taught to compete against each other. Yeah? And but the actual question I have for the panel is, why do men support men? Why do men support men despite everything? Why do men support men when they've been accused of impregnating a 15-year-old child and they're still allowed to enter parliament? Why do men support men when they know that the men that they're sitting with in parliament commits domestic violence at home? See, the way we criticize other women is maybe because we hold each other to a very high standard, and that's why we have the crime de la crime, we have the best of us in parliament representing us, you know? So maybe men need to start holding each other to the same type of standards. Maybe if we have men speaking up on these issues, we wouldn't want to be in parliament so much. We wouldn't want to be in leadership spaces so much. Personally, I would rather stay at home with my daughter, but no. And whenever there's bill consultations, I have to be there reminding men of the things that they're not doing. Yeah? Of the things that they're failing to do. Now I'm raising this not just as a woman, but also as a mother and as a youth as well. So the question to the panel is, why do men support men despite all the...
Thank you. Now that came from the heart.
Well, I'd like to add to it. We have a Ministry of Women. We talk about gender equality, equity. Where is the Ministry of Men? Men go through trauma by toxic partners. Where is the space for healing for men? If men come out and speak of issues, oh, he's a weak leader, he's a weak head of the family, weak head of the clan. That's how society labels us. Yeah, we go through so much, yet some men do it and still show that they love their family. So where is the safe space for men?
Directing the attention to men.
So, in terms of accusations, well, there is the court system, there is, thank you, I can speak now? Thank you. So in terms of accusations, there is the court system, provide the evidence. Sometimes when we see people, taken in for drugs, because most of them are men, and they get bailed out, and we ask the questions. They recorded what transpired. So a lot of laws or a lot of questions can be asked of our justice system. But that's my take on it. Men support men because in an example, I was in Motoka, I went to buy bread, and that's when the president, the name for the nominations were coming up, and that newspaper was just there. So I asked the young girl, "Do you think a female can be the president of Fiji?" She looked at me, she gave back the change, and she said, "I don't think so. I don't think a woman can do it." Coming from a girl, except her words. I took the bread. So yes, your question is valid, but in terms of allegations, that's to the court. In terms of the workload, the men. But like I said, the system needs a lot of improving in terms of the laws that protect women, not just women, but it's a whole top to bottom, bottom to down approach, where the safe spaces are not created. And rather, if she lodges a complaint, she's sort of, being a victim. Because there was also another case. Someone was violated, a woman was violated by a man. She went to the station, and now the police was like, "Okay, you can go back with Howards." So, there's a lot of key areas that needs improvement. That's my take on it.
Lisa, do you have a...
Yeah.
Okay.
We always have these kinds of conversation about, having a men's crisis center or Fiji men's rights movement. Why is there no ministry of men? You have to look at the data. If you look at it in terms of violence, perpetrators of violence are men, victims are girls, women and girls. If you look at it across the board from, look at historical injustice, men are always in power, women are always suffering at the expense of men. So the reason why NGOs are set up specifically for women, or the reason why ministries are set up specifically for women, is because of that. Because in society, women are discriminated against, women are experiencing so many systematic barriers to access basic things that men just don't. And the reason why men support men, because it's a man's world. You know, it's a boys' club, right? So that's why we have perpetrators of coups that are elected leaders. That's why we have perpetrators of domestic violence that are, you know, leaders. That's why you have rugby players who go back and play rugby even though they're convicted rapists. So, because it's a boys' club. And that's the reason why men support men. And when we talk about women, it's always, we're so like, you know, analyzing, oh, she has to be of good standing, or she has to have this position, or she hasn't achieved this because she didn't qualify for this particular ABC standards that we set for women. But for men, you could just be from the farm, or you could just perpetrate and, you know, become a cool, dear-type person, and you are elected right then and there. So there's a difference in terms of how we criticize and how we analyze women leaders and male leaders. And I'll stop there, but that's the reason why we have like specific NGOs and specific ministry, because there's a recognition that women and girls, women with disabilities, marginalized groups need those sort of intervention or need those sort of organization to be able to have the same footing as men who have, unfortunately, have been able to benefit in this system that they're in.
Thank you. I think the answer that we were looking for, number one, culture. That's why women don't support other women culturally. But then women also can be educated to show that we can break the norm and we can actually do something about voting other women. And as mentioned by Lisa, we women, you have to understand the psychological and biological makeup of men and women, the differences that we have, which goes down to the way we look at things. Men look at the big picture, we look at analytics, the very minute details of things, and often we become self-censored, very self-censoring, instead of just taking the bull by the horn and moving forward. It's part of our psychological makeup. But it does not take away that women also have honesty, fairness, and humility, and then when we're in the room, we are more able to do collaborative leadership, whereas it's a difference. So it goes back to so many other factors. And we can't just say women are not supporting women because there are other factors in play. And most importantly, it's the culture and the knowledge base that we have that directs the way we make decisions.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I want to take you guys back before colonial time when we were still sailing the oceans. The women had a special place in our traditional village from where I come from. They were sitting next to the chief to be the filter or compliance officer in terms of village running or village or taking care. Then the people came with the sailboats and introduced religion. It is now called Christianity, and it is embedded in the Bible that women are the ribs from men. So why men pick men goes back to the religious item that has been taught since you came out of the womb, and it is something that we in Zotepa are trying to sort of navigate by trying to tell people to vote for policy. That is the reason why Zotepa was the only party that put a policy or book into the elections office in the last elections, so that we can change this so-called men or women kind of thing, to look at policies without gender, without race, looking at each other as human beings. So really, we are now going to talk about TMS and TSM. It's 150 years since they brought the Bible here. We are now talking about TSM again, something that has been brought from Europe or Finland or somewhere, where we have now in Fiji, Noah, where there is no gender when we do Talanoa. So really, it is our own fault for picking men to men. Not men like that guy, but sorry, I'm just saying, like just to explain it, we need to go back to history, reflect on our own selves. We are all humankind. We need to stop this popularity issue. Popularity issue doesn't come with brain. It comes with fanfare and nothing. Pick policy, please.
We'll give time to
Thank you to all the panelists. I'm Priscilla. I'm here wearing a few hats, so I'm just not going to go there. So Kesa has allowed me to come in as an independent and someone who's been in this political space for a while. My question to the panelists is, have you ever, especially to Honorable Sharma, now that you're part of the legislature, have you ever thought of the electoral system itself? The electoral system is a very, it discounts women already. So, I wish we had someone from the Electoral Commission here who could speak at length about the system. But I think that is a real important component of this discussion. And at some point we should be able to talk about that, because the electoral system itself is a very male-dominated system. And unlike what the lady from Finland spoke about the zipper system and all of that, where women are already legislatively included. Yeah? I think we really need to look at that as a very important, because the barriers that we are talking about, the obstacles, the stats, the research, it's been going on for a long, long time. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is, have we really made inroads in the last 30, 40 years? What have we been advocating? If we have been, what is the bigger issue? And for me, the bigger issue is really the electoral system itself, which is, if you look at the way it's like the big man gets all the votes, and everybody else falls in line. It depends on how much, again, how popular you are, or which party you are in. It's not about policy, it's not about what that person can actually deliver. So I just thought I'd put it out there, and if one of the panelists wants to share their view on it, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Even someone from the Election Commission should have been here as well. See, when you look at a business, sometimes the business has to adjust to how the customer is, how the customer will buy. Some people see elections, parliamentary work is business, or politicians are in the business of selling hope. That's how it's labeled. So, in terms of how our voting system is, it's independent, secret ballot. Yes, we have an open system, but Fiji is 18,000 square kilometers, in total. Not too big, not too small. Yes, we are in for, I think it was mentioned about constituencies. We're in for local elections. This year most probably. There's advisors, there's special administrators. But in terms of representation, yes, it still lacks in terms of not just women, but also youth. So I guess both go hand in hand together. And yes, it can be up for review. We could always bring it up in Parliament of the change that's required, because times are changing, whether it's the Constitution or everything, everything needs to move with time. There needs to be, we need to have amendments in going forward. So yes, definitely, if something that fits to the current modern society, it should be reviewed, it should be changed. But my take, one more thing I'd like to add is, it shouldn't be the fact that to uplift one gender, we undermine the other. And then we, just because of the actions of a few, we blame the whole male society or female society. there needs to sort of be constructive criticism rather than just why. It's very easy to talk and say all you want or be a keyboard warrior. It's very hard when you're in the policy space or legislative space.
While you still have the microphone, we'll get to you. This question came online. Given your journey, what has been the most rewarding moment in your efforts to promote and encourage youth participation?
As a member of parliament, my rewards are when people's problems get solved. While you see me heavily criticizing or scrutinizing, the government, the budgets, the motions, at the back, I sit with government, I sit with the parliament staff, I understand the system better. I take people's issues to the ministers, the authorities, and if they get solved, that's an achievement for me. Because I've already told myself, when I walked in, I saw those doors, I walked in and I said, when you leave Dinesh, that's what I want to leave with. That I tried my best. Because when you go in there, you can have ideas and visions, and when you become a part of a party or a caucus, then there's other key players who need to influence everyone else. And maybe your idea is great, but you know what? We won't budget, we don't have the budget for it, they can wait. So you so how the people perceive you as, oh, this minister's not doing it. Or, he said he'll do it, which is the right thing to do, but it's just that he was not able to influence his own party or his own team. So hurdles after hurdles, challenges after challenges, that come across you, but you need to be a person where you love the challenges, you love to challenge yourself and raise the people's voices, and basically that adds to the bigger picture in making a difference in Fiji. So yeah, that's my takeaway right now. And I'm Honorable Prime Minister is someone, whether it's Christmas Eve or New Year's, he would respond to the people's problems. So I really thank him for that.
I just want to continue the question from this lady. First issue is the coalition agreement that we signed has one of the items is the constitutional review. One of the main things that we wanted to change is the electoral part of it. That is somehow found itself as a constitutional issue, but it should have been an act. Because when it's an act, it changes, because every 4 years you make these elections. When it's enshrined in the Constitution, it is super hard to change it. So what we are saying is that bring the electoral part out of the Constitution, put it out into an act, because we are very fluid. Now Donald Trump has come out 2 weeks ago, he said only 2 terms. So these are things that we need to it's very fluid. Every 4 years it's going to be things changing. So that's the reason we had it as a constitutional change. So now we're working, and then from the constitutional change, go to the electoral act. And then we can have political parties doing TSMs, in terms of their constitution to embed gender equality into their constitutions, and then work from there upwards. Just to answer it, that's the reason, this constitution needs to be changed so that the electoral act becomes outside of the constitution. And have the Constitution as your main law. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, maybe has one last question. I'm looking at time. One question, maybe not a story.
Sorry, this is not a question, it's just a comment. My name is Memili, and I would like to share my personal experience because I was part of the Mob Women's Parliament. Just a personal opinion. One of the things that I actually noticed when we were in Parliament was there was a big gap. Women who has money, finances, women of age group, and the cultural status. When someone that is of cultural status, everybody's going to agree to that person, and they're going to give the position. That and also the gap. You have older women and you have the younger women, and then you have the middle age crisis women who's trying to decide. And then you can actually see that there work together. The power play, you know, women who has the money, they are there like hungry for power. And I'm really sorry to say this, but you know, when I was there, it's really sad to see that they were really not working together. Like older women should be there helping younger women if we're all going to come into the space. And also, I think one of the things that Lisa had mentioned is that you guys do gender sensitized training and how do we instill the behaviors that all these behaviors are instilled behaviors. And personally, I feel like we're talking to, if we're going to do training for middle-aged people, like let's say like a 45-year-old man, he's been behaving that way for 45 years. What makes you think that you can change his behavior in like a 2 weeks training? I'm sorry, but you know, if you want to instill behavior, we need to instill it with children because they are the next generation of people. Thank you.
Thank you. We will take call to action. Lastly, Seth raised his hand. We'll quickly hear his question and wrap up this session for the next one.
Thank you, Kai. What I'm hearing, probably what I have not actually heard, which I think may be implied by the person, the panelists. I haven't actually heard the word attitude being mentioned. But to me, that's the underlying current that runs through the discriminatory, the discriminatory bias that we have. So, for the panelists, all or one of them could respond to how can attitude be legislated? Meaning, can positive legislation be where we encourage positive attitudes towards what I think Faye was talking about, where political parties are mandated to do quote-unquote the right thing, where we have equity at all levels. It's great to help say 25. Why not more than 25? And so I think because it boils down to, for us when we do community awareness, we often say that attitude is the biggest barrier that we have, that keep people marginalized and excluded. So to get the panelists' view on that.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's 25 because it's the SDG requires 30% of our candidates to be women. 30%. That is over 30%. It's actually 42%. So we are far beyond the SDG limits. Thank you. Out of 55. So you take 25 divided by 55, comes to 50, 42. Maybe type something.
Okay, thank you. Kai, I hope that has answered your question. They will be around for lunch. If you want more unpacking of the questions that we've asked them, we thank the panelists again. You have one last comment?
Just a question to everyone. We talk about empowerment for others. Just off the head, how many of you women would want to ever contest in elections and go and change and action what you have spoken here or thought? Just a random.
We have.
Well, in that case, if it's all of you, then I hope to see you contest. Yes, in the next elections. Yeah, change begins with us. I had a vision to make agriculture the backbone, and as a farmer, I got in. And that's the vision. So what we speak of here stays with us. We take it forward, and we bring the changes that we want to bring. It's benefit all of us. That's just one more. my last comment. And your role, madam, is I'll take it to Parliament and we ensure that the mock youth Parliament is done, looking at these factors, minusing these factors. But thank you for showing the courage to go and participate. Yeah, much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Another big round of applause to the next speaker. We have explained shortly, but we thank you for your time and the sharing you've shared with us. So you quickly have 2 minutes to stand up, stretch.
Thank you, Sepasa and Olivia to everyone. I am here representing Fiji Disabled People's Federation, an organization of persons with disability, and the work we do is around promoting and protecting and ensuring that all persons with disabilities in Fiji enjoy all human rights. And I guess one part or a human right is also political participation. And for people with disabilities in Fiji, there are so many barriers. And in the morning, the last panel up until now, we've been hearing the inequality between gender. And I guess from my perspective, I'll be talking a lot on the inequality when it comes to people with disabilities. And I was given 3 areas to speak on the challenges, what we are currently doing as an organization, and how can TSM level the playing field when it comes to this space. And I'd like to start off by paraphrasing what was said by Honorable Gergertabo this morning in terms of diverse representation of voices in political spaces. And in Fiji, 2017 census, we have 14.3% is the population of people with disability. And if we look at how our governance or at any level, national, we look at the parliament, we look at different boards, private, public, even trickle down to district, provincial, look at all governance bodies, their representation of people with disability. We talk about women and the inequality between their representation in these governing bodies, but if we look at women with disabilities, we saw the stats, staggering stats in the morning, 8%, 27%. How much of that is representation of people with disabilities? And if we are trying to level the playing field through TSM, then we need to consider and look at all diverse areas and not just some. And I think Faye touched on it in the earlier panel, and Master Sata Madanawai also addressed it. One of the biggest barriers for people with disability is attitude of people. And when we talk about disability, it is how people with disability are seen. We are not being seen as what we can do. We are being looked at as what we cannot do. And I've been hearing the conversation with the last panel, 25 women from Sudelpa. How many of them 25 are you going to give for women with disabilities? And if you are going to allocate a certain percentage of that 25, what do you have in place to ensure that they can meaningfully, effectively participate and be the voice for people with disability in your party? So when we talk about representation for people with disability, we don't just want to be here warming the seat. We don't want people to say, our party has a person with disability being represented, irrespective of which gender. We want to ensure that they are there, being a voice, raising the issues, and putting in place recommendations that can benefit people with disability not only in Suva or in the Central Division, but out in the Maritime Islands, in the Eastern Divisions. And I think for us as organizations of people with disabilities, the work that we do is we try and see what the gaps are. We listen to people with disabilities wherever we go, and we try and use the stories that we get or the challenges that they face, and we come back and we try and see where can we get the necessary support to ensure that the benefits trickle right down to people with disability in the grassroots. So if we are looking at inclusive governance, and I guess equity was one word that was coming up in the morning, and we are trying to level the playing field. So to level the playing field with women, we've heard a lot of solutions and recommendations that have been said in the morning. But how do you level the playing field when it is a woman with disability that is a mother and that is in the Maritime Islands of Fiji? I even heard in the morning from the Honourable Member of Parliament, Sharma, he said, you have to be somebody who can take pressure to be able to participate in this field. I can tell you that some of our people with disabilities, they attend forums like this internationally. They go through different time zones, and when they come back to Fiji, they hit the ground running. There's only a few handful of us that are here, and we need to be represented in spaces. We don't even have the time to relax or get over our jet lag. We have to be visible in spaces. So, I mean, if we talk about representation, inclusive governance, we need to not only look at TSM to level the playing field, we need to look at TSM as measures that can ensure effective representation. And we were asked also, listening to how many of us women want to be in Parliament representing women. Everybody said, all of us, even us. But what does the system have in place for us to be able to participate effectively and raise the voices of people with disability in these spaces? This TSM is something like what we call within the disability sector reasonable accommodations. Those are adjustments and accommodation that needs to be put in place to ensure that a person with disability can be at the table, be represented at the table, but like what most of the time, Mr. Santa sitting over there is like a mentor to us. So he tells us most of the time, but it's no longer just inclusion. We need equity. Not only sitting at the table and being represented, we need to change the table. We need to transform the table. And I guess the DSMs can be something that can be done to ensure that people with disability can be at the table at decision-making levels, but at the same time having measures in place that can ensure not only their voices are heard, but things can be done about it. Yeah? And when we are looking at TSMs, we are looking at also how political parties, the criteria, the system that is in place, is it accessible for somebody who is totally blind like myself to apply to be a candidate? What is your process? Is it an online process? What do we have to do? You can say it's made easier, it's being put on the internet. As long as you have connectivity, you can apply. But for me, I use a screen reading software. Is the platform to apply to be a candidate accessible for my software so I can put in my application to become a candidate? So for people with disabilities, not only are we looking at leveling the playing field, we need to see how we can best put in measures that can ensure we can participate, not only be represented, but also meaningfully participate. And I guess I'd like to also close by saying For people with disability, we are thankful and very grateful for those in authority who advocates on behalf of us, raising our voices in those spaces. But Faye also alluded to it earlier. For us, we usually live by the motto, nothing about us without us. We need to be there, and we need to be given the capacity to be able to effectively participate in these spaces. And if you look back at the, I'm not sure how many elections we've had so far, but you can see there's only a handful of people with disabilities, and only maybe 2 parties that have people with disabilities as candidates. But we don't know how much effort they have put in, or what measures they have put in place to ensure that they are there and that they are raising issues regarding them. For me to be here today, I am here with Emily, who brought me into my seat. That is a support service for me to be here and for me to be able to share what I'm sharing with you. I need her to be here. And those are some of the things that will ensure we can be here representing ourselves and raising issues that concerns us. I guess that's running from me.
Thank you so much. Again, reminding us in terms of the services that needs to be, when we're talking about participation, what does it mean? And I like the concept of changing the table. Be at the table, but change the table. But Sylvia, to your right, can you pass the microphone to your right? Yes. To Vanya, just in terms of Fiji Council of Social Services, when we talk about TSM, what are the different levels are we encouraging the inclusion of women in decision making?
Yeah, I guess I prepared to speak on inclusive governance, and so I thought I might share with participants that the work that discussed is we're connected at the regional level through PMO, but at the national level I think because it's almost 70 years old and a little bit younger than SSBM, that we have a foot in the door with regards to policies and policy making spaces. So from that we can really share that there's been some promising signs, reforms that's happening in various sectors of government. We would like to acknowledge the works that's ongoing in terms of public finance management, reforms to finance management systems. That we noticed that there's been some good effort in terms of citizens inclusion. We want to note in particular the citizen budget guides. They amended the Financial Management Act to ensure that citizens can also participate, understand the system that has been built for them. Gender budgeting, which the Ministry of Women has been assisting the Ministry of Finance in. Disaster risk finance is a new initiative this year, and really promising. National population policy, which so many people underestimate, but I think it's important if we want to do some transformative work with women and marginalized groups. Audit Act, the physical review, and my friend here, Bill, and I were able to sit on that committee, the National Development Plan. So I think that's one sector of government that's really beginning to demonstrate their intentions to include, not just gender, but socially excluded groups, youth, perhaps even rural populations. There's other reviews underway, like the Integrated Rural Development Framework, and at least the consultation that I attended here in Suva sounded really promising. Their intentions to understand gender and the issues that surround challenges that
exposed to development for women and children and the elderly. The Interkey administrative system, I'm not sure, I didn't get the full details, but I think there were some issues at the beginning, but I think it's still ongoing. So it has significant potential. National security and defense review. There are some questions that have been posed in that particular part of the reforms, particularly around the Fiji police force and the Republic of the Fiji military forces. So these are, places or systems that need to be looked at for us to be able to tackle gender inequality, I think. So we've been, it's been quite, promising. There's some hope that, even we don't stop at one place. We have to look at systems that entrench these discriminations, these discriminatory approaches. So, but we find that there are challenges at some national level. So there's a disconnect between what happens at the national level and the sub-national implementation. It's quite slow. There's limited awareness and capacity for GEDC, so gender equality, disability, social inclusion, and operational levels of government. Advancements in policy often don't translate to practice in certain sectors, and I know that many of you can think of at least one incident. I think in terms of the social sector, particularly NGOs and the private sector, we're seeing some traction in advocacy and sensitization efforts. But our opinion is that their influence is quite limited to their own spheres. Because when we go into other sectors, we find that there's a lot of lack of awareness. So in terms of what we do, of course, we've, from our vision to our mission, the review of our constitution in 2020, where we actually removed reserved seats for women from our board. But last year when we did our election, for the first time, over 50% of our governance is, made up of women. So we find that, you can apply PSNs, but sometimes they use that as just the minimum. It's just, they tick that box, and so they don't really talk about inclusion intentionally. So when we removed that, and then we worked on localization, we found that more women could actually get to the governance level to the board. So we've also worked with balance of power to build women's leadership pipelines. So, one of the things that we're learning is that pairing women leaders with male accompanies helps a lot. And we're understanding the journey that all women, not just women with some level of access, sometimes some of the measures that we implement allows a certain level of, or particular group of women greater access. But we find that community women, women who have demonstrated leadership at the community level and could really, some of that type of approach is needed at national levels. We have to be a bit better at ensuring their access to national levels. So those women's leadership pipelines, we're still working on it. There are things we're learning along the way. We've tried to ensure that there are deliberate spaces for community women. Like we've got a community women in DRR network. They're connected to the Fiji Women in DRR leadership network. These are professionals that are in particular important spaces. I don't know whether I should go to the next one, but I guess in terms of PSNs, we think that we can address gaps in Fiji's governance structures, particularly in political representation. And while historically we, the advocacy around PSNs have focused on reserved seats for women in political spaces, I think that going forward, FPOS feels that more reforms need to be targeted at the political party level. We've already articulated this maybe 2 years ago when we were in discussions with the Fiji Elections Office. We've said that legislations should change. They should mandate reserved seats for women across all levels of party governance. And not limit ourselves to women and youth wings in parties. So, we're talking about, perhaps, I don't know what the various levels of party governance is, but I think that across all of those levels, legislations must outline at least a minimum requirement for women at all those levels. So maybe 10% of the governance, at that level. So I think when we go to the national level, it doesn't really work. We've got to change the ethos, the ethics of political parties. We don't want to be dealing with dramas at the national level. We want paying people to be sorting out their issues at this level. I think if political parties have to survive the next 10 years in this country, they need to make changes here. So legislations need to ensure that they change and reflect that. Women, if it's almost provided as an option, like, okay, women want to, I think that women don't have the choice to not pay taxes. We don't have a choice. So it shouldn't be thought of like that. I think we really need to change the way we think about women's representation. They pay taxes just like everybody else. And people living with disabilities pay taxes just like everybody else. So they should be able to also participate. And I think our laws need to reflect that. I think also that, when parties are preparing or, their candidates for elections, there should be quotas or a set percentage, and the legislation should mandate that for women and youth. Apart from ensuring that half of the forest, as Professor Uma said, half of the forest is there. We're also promoting succession planning for the younger generation. And I think that the laws should also ensure that gender commitments within political party codes and statutes should be in place, and there must be mandatory assessments to maintain party registration, like a GENSI assessment. I think this is something that is probably not, is done within the public sector, but NGOs and other institutions, they are required to take gender assessments in order to receive funds. I think we should apply this to political parties. Yes. If you don't pass the GENSI assessment, your party does not get your party registration renewed. I think it should be done on a regular basis. Annual, I wish this is that this happens every year, and then, you can operate as a political party. I think we have 30 years since independence, so how many years? 50? I think this kind of talk about women as an option is rubbish. We should get rid of that. We should do GENSI assessments. If your party fails, you're not allowed to operate as a political party. GENSI assessments are important. So women's wings alone are insufficient. Gender equity requires systemic reform. We must not settle for this. So those are our thoughts. I'm from Airport.
Thank you. So, Emerald Women is picking these points in terms of key action items or call for action, and this will also feed the next strategizing on the way forward. Thank you, Bobby. And it's calling for GENSI assessments, reform at political party levels. These are questions that, if you think back to the backdrop of the presentations in the morning, this is exactly what I was talking about, happening already in the Pacific. That's a nice segue to what that you say in terms of balance of power and the support and the work that they do supporting women in Fiji.
Maka, thumbs up in the line. Pay my respects to the line. Acknowledge the presence of some women trailblazers who are here. Thank you so much for leading the way. Your policy on my beginner, let me just tell you a story. In 2023, I went back to the village. That was after 18 years. The last time was in 2005. So in 2005, when I went there, everything was running all along. The various co-ops, the various women's group, youth groups. And the men during that time, it was a new man. On Monday, every Monday, they will go out because the source of income is swimming. They will go out to cut the pandanus, and we call it blanket. And then take back to 2020, when we went there, there's been a lot of changes. It was just the women's their business, and it's still running. Now more advanced, now grown bigger, while the youth has gone down. And now the men are not only cutting the pandanus for the women, now they are also doing the sonikie, we call them sonikie. And that is a shift. We're talking about attitude, we're talking about behaviors. There has been a shift these years. And we all know that women in our villages, many of the things that they run are still operating. And normally for many of us, when we come in, we say, that's the leadership that they have. And sometimes we do not recognize it. But leadership exists at that level. So for us at Balance of Power, we are a social norm program that focuses on women in leadership. We are funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, but we are locally led program based in Fiji and managed by TT Global. Our overall goal is that women are increasingly culturally, socially, and politically accepted and act as legitimate political leaders and decision makers across the Pacific region. So in terms of politics, we know that politics permeates all levels. It's not only at the legislature, but also at the ground level. As I mentioned earlier, women are already doing those kind of work. How do we elevate that? It's something that we need to look into. And I believe that for the TSM, it could be a tool that could enhance and elevate the level of the women in leadership. But also there's a need for more focus as well in terms of shifting social norms, shifting attitudes is really needed. For us at Balance of Power, we started in 2019. In 2023, our executive director was asked to be part of the GCC Review Committee as well as the Ethiopian Institution Review Committee. So a woman being part of one of those review committees for male-dominated Ethiopian institutions, we talk about culture. It's about working with culture to shift culture, working with the system to shift the system. So those are some of the things that is needed as well in terms of that. And I know that Anfina is here. The recommendation, we always argue about this recommendation of having from all the 14 provinces, recommendation 8 was on 1/3 of the representatives from each province to be a women. And that is just a small step. How it's being implemented, it will take time as well. So Fiji, in terms of affirmative action, these are just some of the small steps. Within the Ethiopian administration review, we all know that in our various subcommittees in the villages, at the Tikena, at the provincial level, we have women. So, and it's also being endorsed during the GCC meeting. Those are just some of the work that we're doing in terms of promoting gender equality. And currently we're working with the Physical Social Services, and we are looking at exploring partnerships at FEMNIC in terms of that pipeline from community to the national level. And I must acknowledge the Sons of Lampanan as well, that we are also working with them as well. One thing is to have women sitting at the table to be part of the decision making, but also another thing is to how do we contribute effectively. And for Balance of Power, that is the work that we are doing. And how do we support that we are supporting partners with. So in terms of challenges, I wouldn't say much. I know that a lot of things have been shared earlier by our colleagues at the last panel and the session in the last panel. But one of the things from the Women's Pipeline program, because there are some women who wanted to run in the municipal and the national election, one of the things that has been in their mind is the finance. You need finance for the political parties, and we are thankful that Sotelpa has indicated that they have 25 out of the 55 seats for women and youth. Hopefully, if temporary special measures, we need to test it first. It could be tested at the party level. Because TSM is something, because Fiji ratified CEDAW in 1995, and Article 4 is on this TSM. So from 1995 until now, there's nothing being done. So perhaps we need to, as also mentioned by Dr. Kelly Baker, it needs to be specific to our context. No one, there needs to be consultation, but most importantly, as I mentioned earlier, there is a need to shift social norms and attitudes in terms of viewing women in leadership, because some women are already doing that, and how do we elevate that to the national level? Is one of them.
Thank you. Normally, it's working on elevating what already exists. Do not reinvent the wheel. There's leadership already at different levels by women. It's elevating, it's acknowledging the strength in leadership by women at all levels. And if we, before mentioned, before also talked about Sumsong Maram, I know that you always remind everyone you are the biggest organization of women.
No, just organization.
Organization in Fiji, yes. Okay. Would you like to share your insights? You were standing in between now and lunch, so make yours more colorful. As you always do.
Well, what's been mentioned is that we are the biggest organization in the country. Biggest organization. Albeit indigenous and women. We are also the oldest organization in the country, barring the Fiji National Farmers Union. We just celebrated our 100th year anniversary in November last year. And it was attended by over 2,000 women. That's just a background to the Somosomo Pagamaram. Now, the subject, TSM. In earlier conversations I've had on this subject, we came to the conclusion that we should drop the word temporary. That we should look for special measures. Focus on special measures. Because temporary means you use it this week and maybe next week there'll be no more need for it. So stop wasting your time on those kinds of things that are here today and want to go for something that will last and will be more permanent. In the Somosomo Wakumanamo, we don't have any program through which we aim at special measures for women or increasing women's participation in anything. Because we are the largest organization in the country, we are participating in society, particularly in the rural areas. We are there. We are in the village councils, we are in the Tikina councils, we are in the provincial council, and I sit on the Council of Chiefs. Now we are talking, this subject, to me, is multifaceted because it covers a very diverse landscape. Political, social, and economic. You're talking about inclusivity in terms of the minorities. So how do you deal with the measures that would address minorities? In Fiji, the disabled population make up 7% of the total population of the country. In Europe, the transgender population make up, in most countries, make up 9% of the population. So how do you design your special measures? And in Fiji, we have a population under 1 million. But 60% of that population is indigenous. So how do you distribute? Or how are you going to, what will be your focus in terms of your many special measures? And we have a great number of our population that are in the rural areas. Not just rural areas, not Vanuatu, but in the maritime provinces. They have different needs, different requirements. And they have different sets of leaders, men and women. Josiah just gave us an example of what's happening in Libya. And I suppose that would be the case in many other social settings. And we tend to rate things we do according to the economic returns. So when you're looking at special measures, and we're mainly talking about, in this exercise, you have focused on women, disregarding the minorities. And if we were to do this, what would be the return to the country? Would we double the economic growth, or increase economic growth by something %? These are important questions that we need to. Yes, Priscilla, you were saying yes. If we can say that somewhere, women were to be to have equal participation. This is how much, and taking into account women already participating in the labor force and in the informal sector. The majority of people who are in the SMEs are women. So we have to take into account how much earning, the earning capacity. If we have SMEs, what would be how much would we increase the income capacity of people? So it's not just a question of bending or pandering to the proponents of women's rights and democracy. We have to be looking at ourselves. We have to be looking at us, the people of Fiji. How would we benefit from these things? And then we also need to look at what mechanisms are there. to achieve this. The CEDAW has already been mentioned. It's an international instrument, and Fiji signed it in 1995, and as is the case with most international UN conventions, that the ratifying party is beholden to implement the provisions of that convention. And I haven't heard a women's organization since it was ratified at our behest, and the Fiji Women's Rights Movement. In 1995, I haven't heard any women's organization or political party pushing for the implementation of CEDAW. But you all push for a regional thing that doesn't hold the government. The Beijing Platform for Action, and then the Pacific Platform for Action. These are policies. They hold the government, there's no requirement on the government. They are directions that the government should follow. I don't know whether I'm making any sense, am I? You know? We have to make up our minds whether we will get ourselves to attend all these kinds of things just to come and have one big talk fest.
Which we are doing again and again.
And make each other laugh. Yeah, we're grateful to IDEA, but you know, IDEA should also make sure that things are done. My friend and colleague Seta raised the issue of attitude. And we should be using these kinds of forum and space to do that, because the whole aim of training and education is to impart knowledge, teach skills, and inculcate attitude. So when you people plan these kinds of things, please, your name was, Emily was telling me your name last night. Oh, it's a person, Sinatoka cake. And I learned her to read the name 4 times. She kept saying, Sinatoka cake. And I said, Emily, it's Sinatoka cake. Many things we found. And she was just complaining about the parliament, the mock parliament. But these are important things because in Fiji, the landscape is so diverse. So diverse because we then have the ethnic diversity. And within the Toke community, it's much more diverse than the differences between the Indians and the Chinese. Just amongst ourselves. Yeah. I mean, I can swear at you and you laugh. But if I were to do that to Priscilla, she'd give it back. So, we have to look at and appreciate our diversity and find ways to bring bring us together to achieve what we're trying to do. And we have to create or identify in existing mechanisms to do that. And I just mentioned one. Yeah? And then create, what's another word? Institutions to do that. So that we can do whatever we are all saying we want to do. And please, in future, can we just talk about women and not bring in Honorable Sharma's speech about men not having a men's crisis center?
Yeah, I was wondering too.
Yeah.
Yeah, with respect.
Yes.
Respect.
Yes. You know, like for the different parties, they can make their political party, their list system, respond to what we're talking about. Instead of one man, one woman, we have one man, two women. Because in the election, the men will most likely get in, but the second one you don't know about. So two women there. You know, be innovative, but make it in a fun way. Don't talk about these things in opposition to each other just for the sake of opposing each other. But let's have discussions where we build. And we take care of everyone's interest, please. And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to come and participate. And I think I demand a seat in Parliament as a veteran. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anifi. So we can see the connection will come to you. Yes. We have a few comments. I've just been signaled from the back that lunch is ready, so we'll take your comments. Yeah, we'll take your comments before we go for lunch. I see one hand. Do we have a free microphone somewhere? There's two. Yeah. Your question or your statement and to who? Okay. Maybe targeted, not generalized. And there's one hand from this side. No? 2, 3. Okay. Kaiseta, then Mosmi, and then we go to Ian.
Secretary Mother, I am with the Fiji Disabled People's Federation. Thank you, Andy, for your comments, and of course the rest of the panelists, Tabata and Semilia, and Vanya, of course. I'm not sure, but some of us, I want to take us back to that, the presentation that was made by our friend from ANU. And I think she was referring to equity. And I believe Anna told me that the same kind of diagram or picture that I use when I talk about equity. I think for us, and I've been saying, and I thank the Australian government, that inclusion will take us to the table, but equity will transform that table to make sure that we are fully and effectively participating. I think that's where we need to go. If inclusivity is to be the outcome, equity has to be the process to get to that outcome. If it means changing the table, cutting one leg of the table, then cut it. If it means that at some point you might need 2 boxes, 3 boxes to watch a game, then get those boxes organized. If it needs to be paid for by government, then government needs to pay for it. So I think if we focus on the outcome, for temporary special measure is one that will take women with youth participation in government, and then provide without inclusivity, I think it's all about us, what the has been reminding us. I mean, and this is not a question, it's just a statement. That we just need to be focusing on the picture, what's best for everybody, and how different political parties can align to that. If it is to be legislated, then so be it. I think that's, we just need sometimes to take the bull by the horn and get it away. That's all, thank you.
Thank you, Kaiseta. We'll go to Mosmi and then Dr. Kerr, do you have the response to that or we good? And then we'll come to Priscilla.
Okay, thank you very much. I really enjoyed today's session. I enjoyed listening to the views from the NGO and civil society sector. So this session I found interesting in a way that it really made me think about why women don't want to stand in elections. And despite all the encouragement that has been there over the past few years, and it just struck to me when I was listening to Andy Finau, and she started laughing, and I realized that the reason is we are putting too much responsibility on women, and it's making them feel that it is not a fun activity. Whereas participating in elections should be something that should be an enjoyable activity. And if they can find that enjoyment in it as well, they should enjoy it in the same way as when they stand in the Hibiscus Festival, for example, to win the Miss Hibiscus. They enjoy it. It's hard, it's competitive. They do the hard work. At the end of the day, they think whether I win or lose, I will have fun, I will enjoy myself. So that same attitude needs to apply when they stand for elections. You will work hard, you will give everything. And whether you win or lose, you must make sure you enjoy it too. And I think if that can be portrayed to women, then it's actually an enjoying and fulfilling activity, just in the same way when they enter these hibiscus pageant, for example. It could be put in a way that makes people realize, that they can contribute, and at the same time they are allowed to enjoy it as well. Yeah, thank you.
Priscilla, Billy, do you still have a question? Do you still have? Yeah, after Priscilla, then go.
Thank you, Professor. I'm looking at a few notes that I've made, and I was particularly interested in what Vani was going to say, because I've worked with Vani, and now she gets EFCOS, and I'm very proud of her. She spoke about systemic reform, and particularly at party level, that we should be legislated, that a party has as one of the provisions within the law to say that parties should meet a certain number of women members and all that before they can be qualified to be registered. I'd just like to share very quickly about how when the political party reforms took place after the 2006 coup. Some of these changes that came about, the Trade Union Act, the Political Party Act, and the whole lot of laws that were changed, we know that, right? I think the reality on the ground is a lot more different than being able to sit here and say there should be a change, a systemic change. Because when the political party decree at the time was being, I was personally involved as, and now I wear my NFP hat, in terms of gathering signatures, because the requirement was 5,000 signatures before a party could register. So it's a difficult thing to do, especially when you're required to have offices in all these outlying areas, and the constituency was taken away. You know how we had constituencies before, now the whole country is one constituency. So I think that these are issues that we really need to sit and talk about. And also, The question that I now ask, after having been in this space for a long time, I think almost 3 decades, what can we as citizens do? You know, we're forever saying that there's got to be a change, the government needs to do this, the government needs to do that, systemic change. What are we as citizens prepared to do? How far are we prepared to go? Are we ready to join political parties? How many women attend rallies and conventions? How many women are part of working committees? And I am sharing this because I have been in spaces where I've been laughed at for being in a male-dominated space. But until you make or make inroads into those spaces, you are not going to get change. Men are not going to give you stuff on a golden platter. If you think you're going to just be given, the power that they've had all this time, you're in for a big shock. I've been in these spaces, and there were occasions when I was at conventions, working committee meetings, every activity that the party did, I was there in my sari, and it was a joke. It became a joke. Priscilla is in this sexist space, male-dominated sexist space. But I tell you something, I feel very, very rewarded for having taken that journey, because I have been able to make quite a few changes within my political party because I was consistently chipping away. And you're not going to see that change overnight. You just chip away, just be there. Be there. The visibility is so important, your presence is so important. So my thing as a parting conclusion would be, let's ask ourselves, how much are we prepared to do as women? Are we going to keep saying there are all these barriers, we've got children, we've got home? I think I'm fair, Phoebe will agree with me. We have to kind of push the boundaries and state our place, I mean, I had little children when I started out. I would carry them off, their nappies and all. I know it's multitasking, but some of us have had to do that to where we are today. It takes a whole lot of commitment on the part of women. And culture doesn't change, tradition doesn't change overnight. It takes years and years and years to do this. So I just thought I'd put it out there that, we as citizens, we as people who are concerned about women's participation, how much are we prepared to push the boundaries? How much? Are we prepared to go to these meetings and go as a collective? Because if one woman goes, it takes longer, right? If you go as a group, if 20 of you were there all of a sudden at a party meeting, and someone was speaking, it will mean more, right? Okay, there's a whole lot of them there. It raises questions to the leadership. So I'm just talking through experience that these things will need to be done as a practical approach to joining political parties, getting into the leadership, and then making your claim there in saying, no, I need a seat up there. I need a seat to fight to get in. But that's going to only come if you put your heart and soul in it. Thank you. Just one more thing. I've also heard in these spaces the disadvantage of younger women. There's women who are more, they have status, they have money. But I just want to say that, I was once a young girl too. And I started out very young as in the municipal level elections when I stood, and I'm sure Amrifi again would say, we started out as young, we wore jeans and we did the party and we did it too, and we were young too, and we had all those issues. Nobody made provisions for us. We are where we are today through that kind of commitment, through that hard work. So forever saying that older women, I know there's a power play there, but you know, they too are young and they've done the hard yards. They've done the hard yards to get to where they are. So don't envy them, don't be jealous of them. You know, no, I'm just saying, go and talk to them. Find out what strategies they use, what did they do, what level of commitment did it take for them to get there.
Mine is a two-part issue. First one is just, in order for people, we do not advertise. I want to answer the panelist request for how to join. And that's the part of So you really need, if you really want to participate, take the step, give the call to the party office, and show your interest. That is the first thing, to show your interest. It's not the other way around. We do not go around asking for interest, it's the other way around. And my second part is, what do women perceive or desire as the right number for Parliament? Since we are 55, how many should be your desired amount? Thank you.
We'll allow the panelists one last comment, a statement, before we end in, and thinking about the number that Vicky talked about, and doing the hard yards, and adding fun to, yeah.
Maybe 40? Joking aside, there's been a lot of talk from Malaysia, and culture is a barrier for women leaders. But one important thing, if you want to be regarded as a leader, you must be practicing it already. Don't wait for somebody to then call on you and create you as a leader. You know, you already have to be a leader. In wherever it is. Like our representative on the provincial council in Telego, the women representative, is a young, not young woman, but a woman who's shown her leadership in the SME area. So I've been able to sit on the council, provincial council. So you need to be showing leadership in various you know, don't think that because you think you ought to be a leader and you'll be discriminated against because you are a modern young woman. Never happened.
Do you have any last comments?
Yeah, just a comment from Mosby. There was a research done by, I think, USP, an academic at USP, who looked at how there's some festivities around elections prior to 2006. Yes. He documented that really well. This all changed when Fiji first came in. I have to say that. They've changed the mood from celebrations to something that's really scary, that people refuse to go and vote. Yeah? We have to go back there. That's why I'm saying we need to relook at electoral reforms, legal reforms. And in those reforms, apart from addressing issues like that, voter turnout,
we should also address things like this. This is social exclusion. And believe it or not, and of course, we see the impact of social exclusion when there are majority men from the military that are in charge. There are communities that are excluded from the services that is rolled out. That is literally what happens when there is no women's inclusion. Seta was saying, what is the outcome we want to see? We want a better Fiji. And a better Fiji means that women have to be in parliament. But also stressing that political parties have to change. Political parties have to change their efforts. This is a matter of ethics. It's how you treat another human being. And that other human being could be your mother, your daughter. You see, so that's why political party reforms are urgently required. If we want to change our political landscape, there is no other way. Yes, change the constitution. But so many times we go for the national and we don't go for the local, important platforms that serve as the springboard into national leadership. And so we continue to fix things at the national level and we don't change these things. That's why all of these reforms need to take place across the system. Care, administrative, rural development, financial management system. And the good news is, some of this is already taking place. But we have to know where to apply strategic interventions to ensure that we get the change in the short time. I don't want to be sitting here in the next 10 years and answering questions to my daughter. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? So I just think that it's urgently required. And I think people like Lily, he might come here and joke. And she is a really great person to talk to because he's already demonstrating that. I see changes I'll be honest, I see changes in Sudan and I see changes in NFP. I don't yet see it in PEP. And so if you're engaging with PEP, we need to go and tell them about that. Yeah. That's what I'm saying, Andy, that I don't see it yet. And so, as people who hold these values, they work out, we have to start looking at impact to know who our leaders should be. Yeah? Who are the leaders demonstrating impact right now? Vote for those ones the next time.
One last point. This is the last point. The Fiji First, it brought about 40 plus social protection mechanism that's generally enjoyed by the whole country. The school fees, the lunches, the bus fares for the elderly people like me, the social welfare payments to the elderly in the villages, people who were never employed in the first place. They're now enjoying all these facilities. And it's not just changing the culture of the party, but how do you make a difference with these people who are recipients of welfare? And if you go to every tikina in the country, there's a health center. Every maritime island, depending on the size, will have at least one health center with health providers. So it's not just a culture of the parties, it's what the government needs to be providing for the people. And the people vote according to what the government is providing them. And the adage is that the more social welfare you demand from the government, the more power you're giving that government to find the wherewithal in order to provide that welfare.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa, is it short?
Very short, one sentence.
Yes.
I just wanted to echo what Priscilla said, that sometimes TSMs won't work because at the end of the day, people don't vote for women, right? So when they go now for lunch, let's reflect, who did we vote for in the last election? For me, I can say I intentionally made sure that my vote was for a woman that I thought that stood the best chance and needed my support to take them forward to be in parliament. So we can have all these interventions, we got the civil education, but at the end of the day, it boils down to the vote. And that's also another conversation we need to have. How do we get people to vote for women? Because, yeah, and that boils down to like so many awareness that needs to happen with why women should be in leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's give another round